Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Doomslayer won My Hero Academia? This amazing story was written by reeleffendeel. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Chapter 11. Megaton. Island's Central Tower's second floor. Toshinori Yagi was gritting his teeth so hard he swore they would break at any second. He was quite possibly in the worst situation imaginable. He was tied up by advanced security bindings restricting his movement. The Steel Sabers had allied with the League of Villains. They had full control of Island, and he was rapidly bleeding through the remaining embers of One for All. It was a scenario out of his worst nightmares. If he reverted to his regular form, then the secret would be out. The people would lose hope, and All for One would achieve victory. He was struggling as hard as he could to maintain his All Might form, but he was steadily losing power, and if he kept it up any longer, he would revert to his normal form. Looking at the scores of frightened party guests and tied-up pro-heroes, Yagi hoped that no harm would befall them and his friend David Shields, who sat next to Melissa and his aide, Samuel Abraham. Seeing Melissa scared out of her mind as she held on to her father filled him with the resolve to bust out of his restraints, but he couldn't due to how strong they were. The security systems were literally on par with Tartarus prison. He couldn't move an inch. His eyes drifted over to Nine, ignoring the pompous speech the other masked villain was loudly giving out. He never thought he would get to see the leader of the infamous Steel Sabers in a place like this. His blood boiled as he observed the mercenary leader staring stoically ahead without a hint of emotion. Yagi was no stranger to the war crimes the Steel Sabers committed, and he made it his oath to bring them to justice. And now here he was, captured by them, and could only guess what they were after. Was it Island's technology or him? And what about young Midoriya? Was he able to get away? He prayed that his pupil was safe and wouldn't do anything rash. These men would not exercise restraint just because he was a child. God help these mercenaries if any harm befell Midoriya. Nine's internal musings easily drowned out Wolfram's spiel as he watched his soldiers, as well as some of Wolfram's own, guard the ballroom. Though it was a tad too early to celebrate, he couldn't help but feel good about his progress so far. To think that the Sabers would get the opportunity to raid the most heavily guarded artificial island in the world was a 1 in a billion chance. To have it completely under their control was a monumental achievement. The sheer wealth of technology Island had to offer would strengthen the military might of the Sabers 100-fold. They would be unstoppable, and he had the League of Villains and David Shields' short-sighted idiocy to thank for it. He could feel All Might's scathing glare on him, but he cared not. Nine had always wanted to bring down the symbol of peace himself, and soon he would get his chance. All for One was going to have to wait in line because he certainly wasn't going to pass this opportunity up. Just a few more hours, and the Sabers would have their cut of the tech, and all of the hostages would be dead long before the heroes ever tried to set foot here. Nine's wrist communicator started beeping, and he answered. Report. Commander, this is Lieutenant Chimera. We can't raise Theta Team 12. Nine raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? We've been trying to contact them for the last several minutes, but we haven't heard anything back from them. Radio trouble? Our radios are fine, but they're not responding. I'm going to the main server room and see if Mummy can boost the signal. I don't like being put behind schedule. Roger. Nine went for the door and exited the ballroom, leaving Wolfram, his men, and well as his soldiers to guard the heroes and guests. He turned right and walked down the hall until he heard something behind him. He turned his head a little to see 4 security drones position themselves on each side of the door. Figuring out that Mummy must have sent extra security to the ballroom, Nine resumed his march to the main server room, completely unaware that the drones were watching his every move. Island's service bridge. The Doomslayer pulled out the bloody knife from the throat of a saber he just killed and chucked him into the water below. His stealthy approach to the direction Vega was pointing him to was proving to be easier than he thought. With Vega in control of the cameras and security drones, it made slipping past the numerous patrols dotted around Island a breeze. Aside from the one saber he put down who almost spotted him purely by accident, he had already made it this far into their perimeter. But why was Vega leading him to the left quadrant of this island? Spotting a large patrol with an APC in their formation coming up ahead, the Slayer leaped off the bridge, caught a steel girder underneath, and swung himself out of view. Landing on the steel beams under the bridge, The Slayer looked up and saw dust raining down above him as he heard the sounds of heavy tires and marching feet rumble across the bridge. The doomslayer looked down and noticed the recently dead body of the mercenary he just killed float under the bridge. He heard them cross the bridge and continue on their way, leaving him to assume they didn't spot the body. The area you are heading towards functions as the factory section for Island. This is where they manufacture support items as well as their more secretive projects. This area holds a submarine bay located in the very center of this district and is your primary target. The submarine bay is mostly used for transportation and delivery of materials for their projects. The Sabres are using their nuclear submarine to offload the island's technology and use them for their purposes. It is imperative that we do not let the Sabres gain possession of Island's inventions. The doomslayer nodded. There was no telling what would happen if the Sabres got their hands on that tech. A majority of the Sabres are located around this sector of Island in the submarine bay. The factories around the bay are filled with highly volatile materials. I calculated that the detonation of the submarine's nuclear core will create a chain reaction that will destroy this entire quadrant and eliminate half of the Sabres organization. The Slayer was conflicted about that strategy. While it was the perfect way to decimate their army, it left him concerned that he'd be spreading radiation across the island. He still had hostages to save. Your Predator suit can absorb other energies besides Argent energy. I will reconfigure your suit to absorb any radioactivity produced from the detonation of the explosion and extinguish it to prevent widespread contamination and radiation poisoning. You have my assurance that you and the hostages will not be harmed. On a related note, the Sabres will be demoralized and disoriented once you carry this out. I have calculated that this will buy the hostages some time as the Sabres will be solely focused on terminating you. His fingers twitched with anticipation. The Doomslayer jumped across the steel beams and grabbed onto a girder, swinging himself back up onto the bridge and making his way into the factory area. Island's central tower main server room. 9 entered the room with his hands clasped behind his back, eyeing Mummy as he worked at the console. Slice and Chimera were there as well, while Wolfram's subordinates were off combing the rest of the tower for any stragglers. Any word from them? 9 asked. Nothing, sir. They've gone completely dark. Mummy informed. 9 narrowed his eyes. Theta Squad 12 better have a good reason for this. Beta Squad 2 over at the sub-pen were going to broadcast a live video through most of the mainland as an intimidation tactic to steer any hero away from Island. But that was to stall for more time while he and the rest of the Sabres finished up their operations here, and he needed Theta Squad to relay the layout for the subway tunnels after their escape. They weren't responding, and it started to irk 9. If I may make a suggestion, we could see if the terminals are still operational and then activate the live feed transmission to see what's going on. Slice offered. 9 nodded to Mummy, and the bandage-wrapped Quark user began typing on his keyboard, accessing Theta Squad's terminal as he did. Mummy turned on the video feed on the main monitor, but it only showed darkness. They could make out some shapes, but it was still too dark to see. Let me turn on the night vision function, Mummy said as he typed in a command. The screen was bathed in a green hue, and everyone recoiled. What? 9 whispered to himself. The screen showed an abandoned subway station, completely bathed in red. The bodies of Theta Squad 12 were in various states of total mutilation, ripped in half, crushed, blown apart, shot up, or reduced to a pile of body parts. 9 and his lieutenants were no strangers to such imagery, but this was on a completely different level. 9's communicator started beeping again. Commander, we've lost all radio contact with Iota Squad 4 over by the airport. We can't raise anybody there. 9 was about to demand what went wrong until a wave of realization washed over him. He clenched his teeth as he turned to Chimera and Slice. We've been compromised. Island Factory District. Atop the roof of the submarine pen, 3 Sabres were on patrol. They kept their eyes peeled for any intruders and their fingers on the trigger of their assault rifles. One Sabre ventured near the edge of the roof to look over the district. Shame he never bothered to look down when the Doomslayer, climbing up a roof ladder, thrust a knife right into his throat and was promptly hurled downward into a garbage bin below. The other 2 Sabres heard the noise and turned around just in time to see a flurry of combat knives lodge themselves into each of their faces, courtesy of the Slayer's inhuman reflexes. The Slayer climbed up onto the roof as the bodies slumped over onto the ground. Cautiously moving over to a large skylight, he observed the Steel Saber's massive submarine, painted completely black with a red streak going across the middle. It was the largest sub he'd ever seen, and it was probably big enough to fit the whole organization. Again, Vega wasn't exaggerating when he said the Sabers brought every man in their little thrill kill club here. He noticed a multitude of Sabers packaging dozens of inventions and support items into wooden crates, ready to load them onto the sub. /update. 9 and his lieutenants are on to us. They have discovered you killed the squad in the subways, and they have noticed that their men over at the airport are not reporting in. I will stall them, but it is now or never, Slayer. Moving away from the skylight, the Slayer tightened his fists and began to head towards a roof hatch. He was starting to get tired of sneaking around. Island's Central Tower main server room. But how? This entire operation had been flawless. Slice reasoned in denial. So far. It's been successful so far. Chimera corrected her with an irritated tone. What I want to know is what the fuck killed Theta Squad. It couldn't have been a hero. It had to have been someone who was on to our operations. But who? Mummy wondered as he tried to make sense of what happened. We can worry about who killed them later. Mummy, sound the alarm to all our forces. 9 ordered. Mummy nodded and typed in the code to activate the alarm. But nothing happened. The hell? Mummy confusedly uttered as he tried again. Still nothing. What's going on? Why isn't it working? 9 demanded. I don't know. We've been completely locked out of the system. Nothing's responding. Mummy frantically tried to access the main server, but he was repeatedly denied by some unknown program that wasn't there before. What do you mean locked us out of the system? We took control of it hours ago. We are the system. Chimera yelled over Mummy's shoulder. Suddenly, all of the monitors went black. Then they came on again, but this time they all showed an odd blue symbol behind a white background. Mummy tried his hand at the console again, but to no avail. 9 brought up his wrist communicator to notify the rest of his forces, but all he got was static. He tapped again, but there was still nothing. Slice, Chimera, and Mummy checked their communicators too with the same results. They were completely cut off. Clenching his teeth, 9 whipped his head over to Slice. Go to the ballroom. Make sure it's secure and get one of our soldiers to send a message to the rest of our forces that our perimeter's been breached. On foot, if he has to. Slice ran to the door, but was suddenly stopped when 9 yelled, Wait. 9 turned to Mummy. Did you order the security drones to guard the ballroom? What? And no. Mummy hesitantly answered. 9 looked befuddled until his eyes widened in realization. Damn it. The leader of the Steel Sabers ran out of the server room with his lieutenants following after him. Running down the halls, they started to hear the sounds of gunfire and panicked screaming. They turned the corner, and Mummy barely had enough time to dodge out of the way when a security drone flung its cables at his head. Slice and Chimera engaged 2 more drones attacking them. Slice hacked one apart with her hair, while Chimera crushed the other with an enlarged, gorilla-like arm. Mummy threw his bandages at the drone assaulting him, taking control of it, and making it destroy the other one. More screaming was heard coming from the ballroom, and 9 ran past his lieutenants, forcing the door open afterward. Blood was the first thing to fly into his face. A drone that was made to capture intruders just decapitated one of his soldiers right in front of him. The sounds of shouting and more gunfire crashed into his ears as he witnessed some of his soldiers, as well as Wolfram's hired guns, shooting up the attacking drones, while partygoers lay flat on the ground, covering their ears while screaming hysterically. Speaking of Wolfram, the man had already dismantled several of the drones, and using his magnetism quirk, formed a makeshift arm blade to slice a drone in half, while he fired his handgun at the last drone. When it was over, the ballroom was decorated in bullet holes, several eviscerated soldiers, blood, and destroyed drones. 9, his lieutenants, Wolfram, and the other surviving soldiers caught their breaths as they surveyed the carnage. Daigo, Nobu, and Swordkill suddenly barged into the room after hearing the gunshots, and were just as mortified as the others when they saw the state the ballroom was in. Wolfram broke the silence. What the fuck just happened? 9 had the same question Wolfram had. His eyes soon drifted over to David Shield, port of Tokyo Warehouse District. A small army of firefighters, with the help of Backdraft, worked as fast as they could to put out the massive flame wall Endeavor had created. After the vigilante stampeded his way through the port and escaped, law enforcement and heroes descended upon the area to contain the damage. Several paramedics also came to the port to treat the unconscious heroes and the wounded since Recovery Girl was on her way. The wounded would have to make do with regular treatment until she arrived. Eraserhead sat in an ambulance while Present Mike, Midnight, Loud Cloud, Gran Torino, Ryukyu, Slide and Go, Maruko, and Hawks crowded around him. Fat Gum, Mr. Brave, Gang Orca, Selkie, and Crust were out for the count, being loaded into ambulances by paramedics so they could be taken to the nearest hospital. Endeavor was currently in an argument with a JSDF colonel who was lambasting the Flame Hero for nearly setting the whole port ablaze. No, that had to be a mistake. Your quirk never fails. Maybe you weren't using it right. Present Mike babbled in denial. I'm telling you, I focused as hard as I could on that guy, but nothing stopped him from pulling out his weapons. Aizawa responded, sounding defeated. This was going to be a black mark on his career. I mean, Loud Cloud started, but couldn't find the words. Sighing, he slipped off his goggles and ran a hand through his hair. I've literally got nothing to say, man. That's a first for me. It was the same for everyone. That is until Ryukyu spoke up. What if it's his armor? What if it's shielding him from any known quirk suppressant power? That's possible. Gran Torino mused as he scratched his beard. But for all we know, that suit of his could be giving him his power, and there's also the possibility that he could be quirkless if Eraserhead's claims are true, which I believe they are. Not to point out the obvious, but I don't think wearing a souped-up armor gives you super strength comparable to All Might, and I'm also pretty sure it doesn't give you the ability to whip out massive guns out of nowhere. Hawks jadedly notified, still nursing a broken nose. Yeah, Fat Gum and I had the same reaction the first time. Maruko said. The rabbit hero had been treated for her burns, and bandages were covering up her wounds. Some parts of her hair have been burned a little, though. Are we not going to talk about how he pulled out a freaking railgun? I thought weapons like those only exist in fiction. What kind of technology is he even using? Slide and Go wondered. Reed Astro would have a field day if he ever got his hands on whatever crazy weaponry that vigilante was using. The kind that could have blown us to pieces? Present Mike absent-mindedly quipped, earning an elbow jab from Eraserhead. Whatever it was, he could have used it to kill any one of us, but he didn't. Midnight stated matter-of-factly, looking at Ryukyu. That man had every opportunity to kill you, but he never took that option. He never took that option with any of us. Funny, didn't feel that way. The dragon heroine said bitterly as she felt the familiar sting of a busted rib and a missing tooth. We can figure all that out later. We should be talking about what to do now. That lunatic is probably already on Island right now. Loud Cloud pointed over to the island. There's nothing much we can do. The JSDF still have us on standby. They don't want to endanger the hostages. Eraserhead reminded him. But at this rate, they may have to lift that order. We've already been breached by an unknown party. Half of us are incapacitated, and that man is going to get someone killed. Midnight listed, and the severity of the situation made her worried. His motivation does come into question. Gran Torino pondered. What could he possibly be after? Hell if we know. Maruko shrugged. He doesn't look like the saving type dash. You. A familiar voice bellowed. Maruko turned around to see, much to her displeasure, Endeavor stomping towards her. The flame hero had bandages wrapped around his head, which were promptly lit aflame when his eyebrows flared up. Oh dear. Slide and Go squeaked as he slowly backed away. The report from the Hero Public Safety Commission stated you met the vigilante the first time. Why didn't you bring him in? He raged as he grabbed Maruko by the scruff of her uniform. The sheer heat radiating off of him threatened to burn her more. Do you have any notion of the consequences of your blunder? How the fuck was I supposed to know he would kick our asses? Maruko shouted back as she tried to free herself from Endeavor's death grip. And what does it matter to you? You hardly even give a damn about the safety commission, you overblown dickhead. Endeavor raised a fist covered in fire. You insolent, empty-headed trollop, I'll dash. In that instant, Endeavor's flames were extinguished, and he had a sword made out of feathers pressed closely against his neck. Hawks glared up at him with a deadly look in his eyes. Let go of her. Hawks punctuated dangerously. Endeavor grit his teeth as he looked over to Eraserhead, whose glowing red eyes gave him an intimidating appearance as he used his quirk against him. The other heroes had the same look Aizawa had, ready to stop Endeavor by force if necessary. Conceding defeat, he put Maruko down with a seething grimace. Hey, hey, they all heard someone yell. It was from a police officer running over to them, who was already short of breath. The Sabers just hijacked the airwaves. They're broadcasting on every station. He yelled as he headed over back to the blockade near the entrance of the port. The heroes followed the officer back to the barricade where more police officers, JSDF soldiers, emergency crews, other heroes, and reporters were crowded around a broadcast truck. They were all staring at an array of screens inside the truck, showing the dreaded mercenaries themselves. 3 Sabers stood alongside each other. The one in the center had his arms folded while the other 2 beside them held their P90s. They were all standing in a dimly lit control room of some kind with an office door behind them. The tiny window showed a Saber standing guard with his back turned. Citizens of Tokyo, we are the Steel Sabers, and we are in complete control. Island's Central Tower Ballroom. All Might tensed up at the broadcast. The Sabers were now beginning to strike fear and doubt into the public. Reminded that he was again powerless to do anything, All Might struggled against his bindings in another vain attempt to escape. He stopped resisting when he realized that it would only hasten the decline of One for All. Looking over towards 9, he watched the commander of the Sabers order his surviving soldiers to head to different parts of the island and tell the other soldiers to destroy the drones and seek out a possible infiltrator. As they left, All Might turned his gaze over to the dead bodies and destroyed drones. Why did the drones kill them? These were only programmed to capture and subdue any intruders. Why did they suddenly start butchering them? Mizuta Furukido Sato residence. Coincidentally, the boys of Class 1A who weren't able to go to Island with their friends opted to have themselves a little hangout at one of their houses, much like T, Mina, and Hagakure. It was a standard get-together. Pizza, video games, movies, swap stories, and the like. That is until they heard that Island had been taken over by terrorists, and the whole day went from elation to worry. Rikido, Yuga, Shiro, Mizo, Koji, Ojiro, and Tokoimi sat in the living room watching the news. They were glued to their seats ever since the announcement. It was a nail-biting ordeal having to hear that their friends were stuck on an island with the most dangerous mercenaries in the world. As they worried for their friends' lives, they were thrown in for another ringer when they heard that the same vigilante who ripped off Tamura's arm at the mall had plowed his way through several pro-heroes to get to the island. The mere mention of the vigilante was enough to send shivers down their spines, remembering how utterly brutal the man was. Then came the hijacked airwaves showing the Steel Sabers themselves boasting their superiority. The boys could only watch, helpless and angry that there wasn't anything to be done. But that's when they noticed the one Saber guarding the door outside in view of the window suddenly get dragged away out of sight. Shiro blinked. Wait, what just happened to that guy? For a few seconds, there was nothing until a splash of blood covered the window. The teens jumped back in shock. The door was slowly opened, and their jaws dropped when they saw who it was. Mondu, Yugo exclaimed. That's Island's Central Tower Ballroom. That's him. Jiro whispered fearfully to her huddled classmates. Momo, Denki, Mineta, and Ida let out silent gasps when they watched the vigilante himself enter the room, his hands soaked in blood. 9 and Wolfram, along with their followers, noticed him enter the room without drawing the attention of the 3 Sabers. Wolfram carefully studied the vigilante. He remembered hearing from Kurojiri that this was the one who tore off Shigaraki's arm. The Nomu explained to Wolfram that once they were done with Island, All for One would turn his attention to what must be done about the interloper. But what he wanted to know was how the hell did he slip past the Sabers? They were supposed to be the best of the best. Omega Squad 1. There's an intruder in the sub-pen. He's right behind you. Omega Squad 1. Come in. 9 shouted into his communicator. But there was still nothing but static, and the commander angrily ripped the communicator off his arm and threw it to the ground. Island Factory District Sub-Pen. The doomslayers silently stared at the Sabers who had their backs turned to him. The sergeant in the middle was yammering their demands to a camera in front of them. It was most likely broadcasting this. But none of it mattered to the Slayer, who kept his eyes focused on the one in the middle and decided that Motor Mouth would go first. He reached into his Hammerspace backpack. Island Central Tower, 3rd floor. What the fuck? Bakugu loudly cussed as he watched the vigilante pull out a blood-covered chainsaw, much to everyone's horror. Midoriya's pupils dilated when he saw the vigilante's hand grip the ripcord. No, 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 no. Island Factory District. The Slayer's grip tightened on the cord as he glared at the yammering saber, his hatred for the organization growing. These bastards murdered innocent heroes, desecrated their bodies, profiteered off their deaths. He was going to send them all back to hell where they belong. Ozzy Osbourne Straight to Hell starts at 1:10. The Doomslayer revved up his chainsaw, and the sergeant spun around just in time to see him bring his saw down upon him. Ea Wugga. The Doomslayer sawed the saber straight down the middle in a torrent of blood. He swung the saw at the panicking saber on the left, decapitating him in an instant, and turning to the other one on the right who was now screaming and firing at him with his weapon. He ran the saber through with his saw, hefted the body over his head with the still spinning blade ripping into the murk, and threw him at the camera. The dead saber was sent hurling through the observation deck window along with the camera, the hollowed out falling to the ground. The camera just so happened to land on top of a crate, showing an entire sub-pen full of steel sabers dropping what they were doing and arming themselves with their weapons just as the Slayer jumped down into view. He swapped out his chainsaw for the chain gun outfitted with the mobile turret mod, by far his personal favorite. At this point, the sabers had already opened fire upon him with their weapons and were only just noticing that nothing was penetrating the intruder's armor, and he had just pulled out a minigun that unfurled into 3 barrels. The chain gun's gunfire alone was loud enough to drown out the gunfire from the sabers, as well as their shouting. The chain gun spewed out a torrent of 15mm tungsten slugs from its triple barrels so fast and so loud that it could have been mistaken for an A-10 Warthog. The Doomslayer swept the weapon from side to side against the small army of sabers. Many ended up getting perforated into Swiss cheese, reduced to mulch, or outright cut in half. Some tried to hide behind the crates for cover, but the chain gun tore straight through the containers, and any mercenary stupid enough to hide behind them. 1:25. The rounds also hit several fuel drums scattered around the submarine, detonating them in a fiery explosion that blew the sabers to pieces or lit them aflame. Putting away the chain gun, the Slayer jumped on top of the crates, and then jumped up to the walkway above where more sabers were attacking him. He whipped out his super shotgun and blew the first merc in half, reloading instantly and obliterating another one with a simple pull off the trigger. He continued to run along the walkway and blew away any saber with his double-barreled death dealer. Bodies fell off the walkway and plummeted into the rapidly growing fire below. He put away his shotgun and began to punch his way through their ranks in a relentless fury. He punched the jaw off one merc and followed up by smashing the skull of another into a wall. He tore one in half and threw the torso at a hapless merc, falling to the ground. He tried to push the body off of him, but the Doomslayer swiftly brought his foot down upon his skull like he was crushing a watermelon. He drew the rocket launcher equipped with the remote detonation mod and fired a rocket in the other end of the walkway, blowing up the remaining sabers and scattering their body parts like a macabre fireworks display. 2 large groups of sabers who heard the commotion from outside of the sub-pen swarmed in like an army of ants into the sub-bay and fired at the Slayer above. He double-jumped off the walkway and fired 2 rockets at the largest group on the left, detonating them in mid-flight when they tried to run. If the initial explosions didn't kill them, then the bursts of razor-sharp shrapnel certainly did the job, filling the air with the pained screams of the sabers as they profusely bled from the shards digging into their bodies and eyes. Landing atop the sub, the Doomslayer put away the rocket launcher and drew his plasma gun. He unleashed a stream of plasma at the sabers on the other side, killing a few of them as the others quickly began to disperse. He chucked one of his grenades at the fleeing mercs who were reduced to a red mist. Seeing another group of sabers bunch up and noticing that he had acquired a full charge for the heat blast, the Slayer jumped down into the center of the group and pulled the trigger. The sheer heat from the blast radius liquefied the sabers instantaneously, their uniforms and melting flesh sloughing off their bones. One remaining saber that managed to escape the radius kept firing at the Slayer in sheer terror, but he was already upon the soldier, plunging his fist into his chest and ripping out his spinal cord along with his head straight out of his body. He then threw the head at the camera, destroying it and cutting off the transmission. Turning his attention towards the submarine, the Slayer wasted no time jumping back up onto the sub and pulling out his sledgehammer. He ripped off the hatch door and jumped down into the sub, crushing an unlucky saber underneath him like he was a blood-filled soda can. Still clutching the sledgehammer and hatch door in his hands, he glared at the sabers already mobilizing down the sub's hallway. He was certainly going to enjoy this next part. Skip to 254. He rushed towards the mercs as they fired at him, the bullets harmlessly shattering against his armor. He didn't even bother to use the hatch door for a shield, opting to use it as a bludgeon instead. He crushed the first merc's head with a single swing, followed up by smashing his sledgehammer downward onto the skull of another. More sabers started pouring into the hallway, and they met the same fate. Some had their bones fatally broken when the Slayer slammed his shield against them, while others had their internal organs pulverized by his sledgehammer, leaving a mess of broken bodies in his wake. The doomslayer threw his shield like a frisbee at the sabers, slicing several of them in half before embedding itself into the wall. He gripped the sledgehammer with both hands and went full-on Argento on them, destroying their heads and smashing them into the ground, and sometimes even the ceiling, leaving the floor sticky with their blood. The final swing of his sledgehammer broke the spine of the last saber, as well as the head of the hammer as well. Shame. He was starting to like it. The Slayer tossed away the broken sledgehammer and retrieved the hatch door from the wall. He raced down the hall until he turned left down another hallway that led to the navigation room. Two armed sabers emerged from the room, and the Slayer flung the door at the pair, one of them having just enough time to dodge out of the way, while the one behind him was reduced to a red smear when the shield went straight through the poor fucker and impaled itself into another saber in the room. The surviving saber tried to raise his weapon when the Slayer rushed him, and the berserker grabbed him and threw him towards the open door to the navigation room. Due to the door's small frame, the merc's head and legs were sheared off like they were in a meat slicer. The Slayer barged into the navigation room, filled with panicking sabers who were all armed. One tried to shoot him at point blank with a USAS-12, but the Slayer ripped it out of his hands, along with his arms, and ran him straight through the chest. One saber was hiding behind the open door to the navigation room, and the Slayer slammed his foot shut on him, splattering the soldier's body like a fly on a windshield. The sabers were starting to panic for the first time in their careers, and it wasn't hard to see why. They only fought heroes, not a barbarian. A saber who was brave enough to rush him unloaded his MG4 at the Slayer, but he grabbed the weapon and guided it across the room, nailing all of the soldiers while the merc was stupid enough to keep depressing the trigger. The Doomslayer grabbed him by the cranium and smashed him into the periscope, the head bursting apart like a balloon. He pulled out his combat shotgun and exited through the door at the far end, blowing away any soldier unfortunate enough to be in his way. He raced through the tight hallways while his charged burst mod made quick of them. The Doomslayer continued to run through the hallways down to the core, blasting his way through his enemies and filling the metal halls with the sounds of shotgun blasts and clattering shell casings. He blasted the head off another saber before he finally found the room containing the submarine's nuclear core. It was a massive cylindrical device with a multitude of pipes funneled into it along with pumps attached along the base. To detonate the core, you must destroy the coolant pumps. The resulting buildup of pressure will overheat the fuel rods and render them unable to circulate the trapped seawater until the core goes critical. I am turning off the security checks to shut off the reactor now. The blast radius should be low yield and will only affect the factory district of I-Island. You will easily survive the explosion and your suit will absorb any radiation dispersed, as well as the resulting EMP. Be aware that while I-Island has an array of emergency generators, the security drones will be permanently disabled. I can still hack the security systems, but the drones will be inoperable. Fine with him. The Slayer began to rip apart the coolant pumps with his bare hands, the steel easily torn apart like cheap cardboard. As he continued to destroy the pumps, alarms began to blare and emergency lights bathed the room in red. The fuel rods inside the core began to melt and were immediately going critical, with the temperature inside the room reaching unbearable levels. As the Doomslayer destroyed the last of the pumps and saw the reactor expanding, he got out his Gauss cannon and charged up the siege mode mod. bracing himself for the explosion as he began to depress the trigger. Didn't this remind him of something? If stopping our energy production is what you want, then you only need to destroy this last filter, and Argent energy will no longer exist in this solar system. We will be back at square one. Oh yeah, good times. A fireman had just put out another pool of flames near the port with his hose when he noticed a bright flash out of the corner of his eye. He turned his head over to Island and his entire world went white when an utterly gigantic ball of fire erupted from the island and sent him, his other firefighters along with several heroes landing flat on their asses and nearly deafening them. The explosion could be seen from far away on the mainland and was loud enough to shatter every manner of glass on the shoreline and causing thousands upon thousands of Japanese citizens to cry out in panic. Maruko was nearly blinded when the rippling explosion came from Island and was forced to cover her ears from the volume due to her sensitive hearing. On Island, any sabers inside the industrial district were swallowed up in the explosion that consumed the entire area, bathing it in fire, more explosions, and casting an orange glow across the island. Every single window was shattered, and the force of the blast shook the island like it was hit by an earthquake. Izuku and his friends nearly had their eardrums blown out as the window exploded into glass and parts of the ceiling fell on top of them. The chandelier hanging in the ballroom fell from the rafters, causing everyone to scramble out of the way as it hit. Sabers near the industrial district were thrown off their feet, and the security drones fell over when the EMP fried their internal circuits. In short, it was like a bomb hit Island. And all of the radioactivity that was invisible to the naked eye was being funneled back into the ruined industrial district via unknown means. Back at the port of Tokyo, everyone was treated to the sight of a fucking mushroom cloud coming from Island. Tony Pope and his cameraman stared on with their jaws hanging open. Holy God! Tell me you got that. You betcha. Island's service bridge. Doom 2016 intro. The sabers dotted around the island were quick to recover from the explosion, and squads from all over the island rushed to the factory district as fast as they could, but the EMP disabled their radios. Luckily, their APC and tanks were shielded with insulated armor that protected them from anything that could disable them. Shame they couldn't do that for their radios. Several squads and APCs were now converged at the service bridge that led to the industrial district. The Steel Sabers felt their morale crumble when they realized that the submarine was most likely taken out along with most of their forces. Then, they heard something. It was a low thumping sound that was coming from the other end of the bridge. The mercenaries immediately took their positions, aiming their weapons toward the bridge. The gunners loaded up the turrets on the APCs. Snipers armed with DSR-50s aimed through their scopes. The sound was getting louder. It almost sounded like they were footsteps. The sabers were beginning to sweat as their grips on their weaponry tightened. The sound was slow, methodical, and maddening. From afar, they could see a shape through the sea of flames coming towards the bridge. It was hard to make out, but as it drew nearer, it turned out to be the figure of a man, and he finally stepped forth from the fire. The unchained predator, completely unfazed and untouched from the blast, plodded towards the sabers with his super shotgun clutched firmly in his grasp. All squads focus fire on the hostile. I repeat, focus fire on the hostile. As the bullets did absolutely nothing to his Predator suit, the Slayer popped open the breech of his super shotgun and loaded in 2 shells. Rip. End. Tier. To be continued. Chapter 12. The Destroyer. Part 1. Mizuta Scenic Overlook. Normally when people or tourists came to this little spot in the Japanese countryside, it was mostly to enjoy the view and bask in the lush forests of Japan. Now it was mostly deserted, save for Usual and Uriel, who stood alone near the edge as he observed Island far away out in the distance. They could see the mushroom cloud beginning to dissipate, while down below the cityscape, emergency vehicles screamed down the highways. Their ears began to pick up the sounds of gunfire coming from the island. The Doomslayer's retribution upon the Steel Sabers had begun. Usual and Uriel could only imagine what was going on over there. The sheer, unspeakable brutality being carried out on that island would scar the world forever. As much as the Archangels wanted to intervene, they knew that it was not their place to interfere in the realm of mortals. They were bound by law to observe and could only directly take action if they were granted permission. Uriel swallowed fearfully. Usual placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It is okay to be frightened, sister," Usual assured her. "I know." Uriel lowered her head. "But his presence has the entirety of the Ascendant Realm questioning what must be done. Even the Prime Council is at a loss. He is, after all, the prophesied destroyer. Do not forget, Uriel. The Helix Stone described him as the destroyer of evil, not the innocent," Usual reminded her. "He went out of his way to save those school children and their teacher. He did not harm those UA students and did not kill any of those heroes who tried to stop him. I am fully confident that the Doomslayer will rescue the hostages and All Might. He is not our enemy." Uriel cupped her chin in thought, eventually concluding that her brother had a very valid point. If that is the case, then I pray that their lives will be safe in his hands. They heard another explosion come from Island, and the gunfire began to increase in intensity. They felt a chill when they sensed the Hellwalkers' rage from where they stood. The Archangels could only hope that the Sabers' deaths were quick and painless. Island. Sonic mayhem descent into Cerberin. Ah. The Saber's torso was sent sailing over his panicking comrades when the Slayer blew him in half with his super shotgun. Swapping his favorite weapon out for the HAR, he began racking up headshot after headshot as the 50 caliber bullets tore through the skulls of the attacking Sabers. He then followed up by unleashing a barrage of missiles at the remaining mercs who were messily blown apart. Another squad of Sabers rounded the corner of a building to witness an utterly grisly sight. A lone man in green armor, standing amongst a literal sea of blood and dismembered bodies, with several APCs reduced to burning scrap behind him. Tango Primary spotted. "Light the fucker up." Bolting towards the squad as the bullets shattered against his plating, the Slayer drew his super shotgun again and blasted through them while grabbing one of them by the neck and tearing out his jugular. He put away his weapon and threw a fist that went straight through the face of a Saber, grabbed his assault rifle, and gunned down several of his squad mates. He launched himself at the sergeant and slammed his foot down on his ankle, breaking it before grabbing him by the sides of his head and tearing it right off his shoulders. "Oh God, no fucking dash." The terrified Saber who uselessly fired his pistol at him was promptly silenced when the Slayer brought a downward chop upon his skull, splitting his head vertically in half. The sounds of a 30mm gun spitting hot lead at him turned his attention to an APC, and several squads of steel Sabers on each side of it were charging towards him down the road ahead, running towards the small army without a hint of fear as they fired what amounted to several thousand bullets and shells at him. The Doomslayer brought out the combat shotgun and attached the explosive shot mod. He launched a grenade into the nearest group, hopped up on top of the APC as chunks rained down on him, and bent the barrel of the turret. He tore off the hatch and launched another grenade into the interior of the APC, the explosion catapulting the Slayer into the air and taking out several more Sabers. He pivoted himself around in midair and began blasting the surviving Sabers with his shotgun as he fell downwards. Landing onto the skull of a soldier and reducing it to paste, the Doomslayer unloaded more shells into the Sabers and finished the last one off by throwing a combat knife into his throat. The emergency generators came online at this moment, and all of the lampposts as well as the lights inside every building on the island flickered back on. Looking up at one of the now activated security cameras near a signpost and figuring that 9 was probably watching this, the Doomslayer went over to a dead Saber and ripped off his head. He held up the severed head in front of the camera, following up by crushing it in his grasp and sending blood and brains spilling onto the street. He glared at the camera threateningly, giving 9 a clear message. He was coming for him. His HUD showed him the map of the island, showing thousands of red blips nearing his position as well as displaying how many Sabers were left on Island. 5,261 of them remain. Time to get to work. Bringing out the chain gun, he swapped out the mobile turret mod for the seldom used Gatling rotator mod. It may not have the destructive capability as its predecessor, but the incendiary ammo was a nice touch. Running down the street, he made a sharp left and kept heading straight until he heard the telltale sounds of running footsteps and APC engines. He spun up the barrel just as he emerged from the street corner to come face to face against a small army of Sabers and several APCs. Since the barrel of the chain gun was already spinning up, the Slayer depressed the trigger and the first few Sabers in front of him were shredded apart. But it didn't stop there. the bullets continued drilling straight through the ones behind them. The superheated rounds tore through the crowd, the slightest graze lighting them on fire and detonating the grenades around their belts. The tungsten bullets perforated the APCs and ignited the fuel inside them, creating more explosions amongst the army. Screams filled the air as the sabers were cut to ribbons, blown to pieces, and lit aflame in a domino effect of destruction. The Slayer walked forward as his chain gun spewed white-hot death at the army before him as blood flowed across the concrete like a stream. Once the last of them were gunned down, the Slayer heard several APCs approaching from behind and fast. Dispensing his chain gun into his hammerspace backpack, he turned around and charged toward the APCs. There were 8 of them in total barreling down the street and firing their coaxial turrets at him. The 30mm rounds that were being fired out of the barrels were capable of destroying a fortified bunker, tearing apart a lightly armored vehicle, and vaporizing live targets. So it pretty much came to a jaw-dropping shock when the main gunners inside the APCs saw that the 30mm rounds were bouncing off the Tango Primary's armor like fucking golf balls. The Doomslayer could feel the fist-sized bullets impact his armor, but not stagger him in the slightest. It wasn't surprising given his first fight against the Sabers in his hideout. If the hell-forged plating of his Predator suit could protect him from hell energy and demons alike, then it had no problem repelling modern firearms. He closed the distance and jumped on top of the first APC and tore off the tow launcher next to the turret. The Sabers inside the APC began to flip out. He tore off the tow. He tore off the fucking tow dash. The Doomslayer aimed down at the APC and pulled the trigger to fire a missile point blank at the vehicle, which exploded into a ball of fire. He leaped off the wreckage and landed atop the second APC, bringing out his rocket launcher and switching to the lock-on burst mod. He locked onto the other 3 APCs and launched the rockets at them before double jumping off the APC he was on and firing another rocket at it. The force of the explosion propelled him up into the air just as the APCs beneath him exploded, and he locked onto 3 more vehicles as they fired up at him. He pulled the trigger to deliver his destructive ordnance again and fell downwards towards the last remaining APC just as the others were enveloped in massive explosions. Balling up both of his fists, the Slayer slammed down upon the APC and crushed it with the force of a falling wrecking ball. The APC seemingly folded in on itself due to the extreme force, and the occupants inside were instantly killed. His HUD began to pick up 3 very large groups of hostiles approaching his position from the 3-way intersection he was in. Looking down at the ruined APC beneath him, the Doomslayer easily tore off the coaxial turret and wielded it like a giant warhammer. The first group of Sabers, easily numbering close to 1,000, arrived on the scene just in time to see the Tango Primary charge towards them while carrying a ruined APC turret in his hands. What the fuck is that dash? Open fire. Kill that motherfucker. What happened next could only be described as an utter bloodbath. The Doomslayer swung his makeshift weapon downward at the Sabers and splattered them like they were flies. He charged at the mercs, and while swinging his club to and fro so hard that most of them exploded into viscera from the force and weight of the weapon. Sabers were sent flying with a majority of their bones reduced to paste and slammed into buildings or through windows in broken, crumpled-up heaps. The Doomslayer continued to crush the opposition in a frenzied fury, each soldier exploding like a balloon from every swing of his club. The gore began to splash over his Predator suit, literally painting him with the blood of his enemies and further demoralizing the Sabers who wildly fired their weapons at him. The Slayer began to spin around like a top with his club in hand, utterly destroying the Sabers and sending them hurtling into walls where they splattered against them and staining the buildings red. He finally threw the ruined turret into the crowd, shredding apart most of them in its flight path before slamming into a building while pancaking more unlucky mercs against it. He pulled out his chainsaw and leaped into the fray with all of the rage-filled zeal he had during his fight against the demons in hell. He became a walking storm of hate and rancor. He ripped and tore his way through the crowd with his saw as their bullets ricocheted off their armor and back into them. Time seemed to blur for the Slayer as he sliced several heads off in one swing. It was one of those rare moments during the eons in the Dark Realm where he entered a berserker state without the use of a berserk sphere. He put away his chainsaw and grabbed a saber by the sides of his head, tore him straight down the middle, followed up by shoving his fist through the chest of another saber before back fisting the head off the one next to him. He then dove into the middle of the army and began ripping off their heads and limbs while punching through their bodies and sending most of their blood and entrails splattering across the ground. Time lost all meaning to the doomslayer, and he tore through the mercenaries. All he could hear were screaming, bones breaking, flesh tearing, gunfire, men barking orders, and blood spilling across the ground. After what seemed like mere minutes to him, the slayer finally snapped out of his haze and could only see red in his vision. Wiping off the blood covering his helmet visor, he found himself standing atop a small hill of eviscerated corpses with an ankle-deep lake of blood around it, with more dead bodies floating amongst the remains and fires dotted all over the place. The first of the two large groups arrived at the scene and stopped dead in their tracks. Many of them were shaking with fright or outright vomiting inside their masks. They never took their eyes off the armored intruder who was quite literally drenched in blood and standing atop a hill of their comrades, all of them dismembered and butchered beyond recognition. It was like they were looking at a vision of hell, a fate that awaited all of them for murdering innocent heroes for years. Hold fast, it's only one hostile. All squads engage. In gag dash, the slayer instantly spun around while pulling out his Gauss cannon and fired at the sergeant. He was instantly railed into oblivion along with dozens of sabers unlucky enough to be behind him. He jumped off the bodies and quickly exchanged his siege mode mod with the precision bolt mod as the sabers opened fire. The doomslayer began scoring multiple headshots, each kill detonating the body of the dispatched merc in a volatile discharge that took out anyone near the blast radius. Due to the sabers being so densely packed against one another, the precision bolt blasts were rapidly thinning them out and covering them in the steaming blood of their vaporized squad mates. The sabers at this point were now completely demoralized and began to flee for their lives. The slayer followed after them while launching more ionized flechettes at them before putting it away and turning to the third squad coming at him from the opposite street. He pulled out the chain gun and HAR, dual-wielding them with ease and unleashing a hailstorm of incendiary tungsten rounds, 50 caliber bullets, and missiles at the army before him while slowly marching towards them with his fingers on the triggers. The sabers in the front barely had time to bring up their weapon as they were mulched into a red paste along with the others behind them. More and more of the mercs were killed in droves until the ones in the back that hadn't been killed started to run for their lives as fast as they could. Fall back to the central tower, now. The doomslayer stopped firing and watched the sabers run away in the other direction, leaving their dead or dying squadmates behind. His HUD began to show the sabers in the central quadrant of Island retreating to the central tower or staying near the vicinity of the tower, most likely fortifying their positions. He was almost going to head right on over to the central tower and take them out along with 9, but then he noticed there were still more sabers located on the right quadrant of the island, which hosted their expo events. The doomslayer stood still, deep in thought. He could attack the central tower now, but that would still leave potential reinforcements holding him up if they ever grew brave enough to stop him. That, and if the heroes ever decided to storm the island, then they would end up in the sabers' crosshairs. Not wanting to have any more heroes die at their hands, the slayer drew his super shotgun and made a break for the right quadrant of Island. The slayer mentally remarked to himself how easy this was as he ran through the gore-soaked streets. Eons of fighting in hell had rendered any non-demonic opposition virtually powerless against him. It made the doomslayer feel oddly comfortable, figuring he needed a break from fighting demons for so long. But then there were the superpowered beings of this world. He hoped he wouldn't have to fight them. Not that he couldn't easily beat them, but rather because they were genuinely helping or saving innocent people. He didn't want to be lumped together with these hero killers. Speaking of which, 3,724 remaining. Kobe Hyogo Prefecture. Within an abandoned factory, the sounds of a television set could be heard within the hollowed-out assembly line. Up in the empty office area, a woman was seated at one of the remaining desks watching the TV. She was intently observing the news report as she plucked out strands of her blue and pink two-tone hair and molded them into bullets like they were made of clay. She never took her eyes off the TV as she loaded her specialized ammunition into her arm, which opened itself up into a magazine-like compartment made of muscle and bone. An obnoxious American reporter was losing his shit right in front of the camera as police, military, and heroes were running around all over the place. The footage switched to the speck of Island out in the distance, thin trails of smoke coming from it along with the occasional popping of gunfire. Changing the channel, the woman watched another news report that showed a playback of the vigilante who plowed his way through the port and put several pro-heroes in the hospital. The man, shockingly enough, was powerful enough to one-shot the flame hero himself. Couldn't have happened to a nicer douchebag. She switched off the TV, flipped open her laptop, and scrolled through the internet until she came upon pictures of the vigilante on social media. She eventually found a particular picture of him tearing off the arm of Tamura Shigaraki, confirmed by some sources to be the leader of the League of Villains. She zoomed in on the vigilante and leaned in closer to the screen. Taking on the LOV was quite an accomplishment, but waging war against the most feared mercenaries in the world? This guy had to be tougher than tungsten and meaner than hell. A man after my own heart. Lady Nagant smiled as she brushed aside her locks of hair. Hope you live through this. To be continued. Chapter 13. The Destroyer. Part 2. One shudders to imagine what inhuman thoughts lie behind that mask. What dreams of chronic and sustained cruelty. Spy, Team Fortress 2. Port of Tokyo Warehouse District. Rumi's mind was in a frenzy as she quickly evacuated the firefighters from the port. Her ears were still ringing from the massive explosion earlier, and the panicking emergency personnel wasn't helping her at all. Looking behind her, she saw soldiers and heroes staring toward Island completely gobsmacked, and it wasn't hard to see why. They just witnessed that chainsaw-wielding maniac sawing a man straight down the middle and hacked two more to pieces before throwing one of them and the camera out of the observation deck window. From there, they watched him butcher the steel sabers without mercy with weaponry that should be, by all accounts, outlawed. Then he started to tear them apart with his bare hands and ripped off the head of a mercenary through his stomach before throwing it at the camera and cutting off the transmission, leaving everyone who was watching the transmission horrified and some of them throwing up. And then came the explosion. Miruko remembered being thrown back and nearly having her eardrums blown out as shattered glass from the warehouse rained down on her and the others. As they gathered their thoughts together, they heard the sounds of battle coming from Island. It was loud enough for all to hear, but Rumi's heightened hearing began to pick up other sounds amongst the gunfire and explosions, screaming. It soon began to dawn upon everyone that the vigilante was waging war upon the sabers and winning. As everyone listened to the chaotic noises coming from the artificial island, Miruko was slowly beginning to realize that this was on her. Maybe Endeavor was right to yell at her for not bringing the vigilante in the first time they met at the park. Maybe this was all her fault. And yet why did she feel so elated that the vigilante was killing the sabers? Miruko's smile vanished and her mood was replaced with shame when she realized she was going back to that dark place again. Even after all those years of leaving that part of her past behind, it still came rushing back to her with a vengeance. Unknown location. Leaning back in his chair with the side of his face resting against his bald hand, the dreaded leader of the League of Villains watched the news. This was certainly an unexpected outcome. Not once did he predict that the events at Island would escalate to such a level. The destruction, the bloodshed, the panic that was brought about from the transmission and the explosion, all of it caused by a vigilante. The same man who tore off his student's arm. All for one had a particular disdain for those who participated in vigilantism. Since they weren't constrained by the law, they could freely do whatever they wanted and engage villains without any consequence. The problem was that sometimes they would unknowingly interfere in his machinations and made sure to have his agents eliminate them if necessary. But then there was this man. Dispatching several pro-heroes non-lethally and engaging an entire organization of infamous contract killers was unheard of. The vigilante paid no mind to the sheer panic he was causing when he slaughtered the steel sabers on national television or the sheer devastation he unleashed when he set off that explosion, possibly from when he destroyed the Sabres submarine. Something about this man intrigued All for One. He didn't need to capture him or even speak to him to know. He could see that this vigilante was special, and whatever quirk he had, All for One desired it. This was one of those very rare occurrences where he was willing to persuade a vigilante to join the LOV. He made himself a mental note to look into a particular former pro-hero turned vigilante over in Kobe. But that could be saved for later. He had to focus on the matter at hand. An outside element had upended his plans on Island, and he needed to retake control. Luckily, All for One always had a backup plan in case things ever went sour. He picked up the cell phone from his desk and was about to contact one of his followers when he noticed that he had just received a text from Kurojairi. I have successfully retrieved Tamura's arm. The police were currently too preoccupied with the Island siege to notice. Excellent. With any luck, Dr. Garaki would be able to reattach his protégé's arm. All for One scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he wanted. He pressed the call button. Yes, Master. Are you anywhere near Island? I am, Master. Good. I'm sending you some of our members to accompany you to the island with a special package. Wolfram and the Sabres had their chance. Execute Plan B. Island Expo District. 2 Sabres from Gamma Squad couldn't take their eyes off the rising pillars of smoke coming from the central quadrant of Island. Behind them were scores of Sabres setting up defenses and mobilizing their APCs in response to the explosion and the sounds of a massive battle. The two could sense the dread and uncertainty in the air as some mercenaries began to bring out the big guns for their emplacements. This is bad, man. This is so fucking bad. You're telling me. How the hell did one man get past us? Your guess is as good as mine. Did you see what he did to our guys on TV? That was some fucked up shit, Marley. Marley checked over the ammo belt attached to his MG4 light machine gun. There's no way that guy could have been a hero. They don't kill. Ever. You don't think they have people like that hidden from the public eye, do you? Cruz swallowed. Don't be fucking stupid, Cruz. There's no way the Hero Association would hire anybody like that. It doesn't fit their MO at all. Marley scoffed. But what if he's a part of some secret Hero Black Ops program that we don't know about? I think we should just surrender. I mean, maybe that psycho will let us lead Dash. Marley smacked Cruz across the face. Surrender? How someone like you got to wear this uniform? I'll never know. Sabres never surrender. Do you really think the Hero Association will show us any leniency after the shit we've done over the years? We have the blood of 246 heroes all over our hands. They are never going to let this go. Hey, knock it off and move out. A Sabre shouted at Cruz and Merrily. The sergeants want all of us gathered. The 2 soldiers followed one of their own to a massive gathering of Sabres from squads Gamma, Beta, and Alpha. All of them were armed and incredibly antsy due to the destruction of their moving headquarters, as well as the losses they suffered from the blast, and whatever the hell was going on over at the Central Quadrant. 3 sergeants were standing atop an APC, regarding the crowd of mercenaries gathered before them. All right, everyone listen up. Our situation here is foobar. We've lost the sub, most of our forces, our radios are fried, and the Tango Primary is still on the island. We are effectively cut off from 9, and it won't be long before the JSDF and the heroes over on the mainland mount an attempt to retake the island. The first sergeant began. The Tango Primary has reduced our ground forces to 35% operational status, so here's what we are going to do. We will mount our defenses around the perimeter of the Expo District and hold our positions until 9 can send for reinforcements and possible exfiltration. A second sergeant briefed. We want everyone to keep their eyes peeled and have a second pair in the back of your heads. Get to your posts and make sure all of our emplacements are locked and loaded. If any of you see the first sign of the Tango Primary or a Hero SHIT, the third sergeant gawked when he witnessed a fuel tanker carrying 2 tanks filled with petroleum soar through the air right towards them. Everyone looked up and scrambled as fast as they could for cover, but it was too late. As soon as the tanker impacted the APC, the resulting force ruptured the tank, and all it took was a single spark from the chaos to ignite the petroleum spilling from the tank. The explosion enveloped the sergeants and the Sabres near it in a plume of searing flames, blanketing most of the area in a sea of fire. Dozens of Sabres and the sergeants who were caught in the blast radius were killed instantly, but they were the lucky ones. The petroleum sprayed out in all directions, dousing the mercenaries with the sticky substance and lighting them aflame. It adhered to their skin and burned through their suits as they desperately tried to get the makeshift napalm off of them, but to no avail. All they did was tear off their melting skin when they pulled off their uniforms. The fire began to spread all around the area as the Sabres scrambled to get away from the searing flames, hoping that things couldn't get any worse. It did. He's on the bridge. Tango Primary's coming. A Sabre shouted as he pointed to the service bridge. Every saber within an earshot stopped what they were doing and rushed towards the entrance to the expo district, leaving behind their comrades who were dead, dying, or reduced to charred corpses. The makeshift barricades were swarming with sabers as they armed the mounted defenses, including M2 Browning turrets, GEM 134 miniguns, and 19 Malawian Quachas grenade launchers. Snipers up on the buildings near the bridge took their position with their sniper rifles at the ready. Several APCs rolled up near the emplacements and rotated their 30mm guns at the bridge. Everyone else armed their weapons and prepared themselves. As the sounds of crackling fire and the moans of the dying filled the air, the sabers never took their eyes off the bridge, but their shaking arms were clear signs they were now completely demoralized. After several nerve-shredding seconds, he finally came into view. The Slayer slowly walked across the bridge towards the entrenched sabers with all of the blood that was caked onto his armor mysteriously gone. One of the sabers buckled from the pressure and fired his assault rifle at the doomslayer, causing everyone else to open fire. A cascade of lead and grenades streaked across the bridge, hitting the Slayer dead on, but the shots went straight through him. It was like they were shooting at a phantom. Everything was hitting nothing but air as the Tango primary kept walking towards them without a scratch. He got closer and closer to the sabers as the bullets went through his body and suddenly disappeared in a bright flash. The sabers stopped firing and jerked backward in confusion, spotting a small object sitting on the ground where the hostile just vanished. It was white-colored and resembled a grenade with blue lights on the side. Sparks started to shoot out from it, and the device dissolved into rusted metal. As the sabers tried to process what was going on, they were alerted to a scream coming from above. They all looked up to one of the nearby buildings and saw to their horror the Tango primary disemboweling one of the sniper teams with a chainsaw. The Slayer stared down at the terrified sabers as they fired upon him again. Before his foray into the expo district, the Slayer threw the petroleum tanker at them to disorient them and then deployed his hologram projector as a distraction. He then swam over to the right quadrant of I Island as the hologram walked across the bridge, having arrived at the expo district just as the sabers spotted his hologram. From there, he easily clambered up to the nearest building without being spotted and killed the snipers on the roof. Drawing his super shotgun, the Doomslayer jumped off the roof with his saw and sawed off in his hands down towards the sabers, who were now screaming bloody murder. I Island's central tower ballroom. Momo's heart slammed against her chest as she watched the vigilante tearing through the sabers on the main screen. Tears were streaming down her cheeks as she hyperventilated out of fear. Her friends weren't faring much better. Ida and Dinky were having panic attacks. Mineta had fainted, and poor Jiro was now openly sobbing into Momo's shoulder. The partygoers and captured heroes were having the same reaction. Every scene played out the same. Scores of mercenaries would try to fight the armored man only for them to be horribly butchered like animals. Blood and entrails flew everywhere. It was like watching a horror movie come to life. All Might felt his blood run cold as he watched the man tear out a saber's spine with his bare hands. Never in his entire life did he ever witness so much blood and savagery. He was no stranger to the grim realities of being a hero. From watching his mentor Nana die before his eyes to his bloody duel with All for One that left him crippled, he knew the risks that came with the job. But this was something completely different. This was a man who had absolutely no qualms about killing and didn't have a shred of mercy within him. Not only that, but it was the same man who disarmed Tamura Shigaraki not just a day ago. All Might was so transfixed on the vigilante's rampage that he couldn't even begin to question what he was doing here during a siege. All he kept seeing were the terrorists being torn apart in the most horrific way possible. Nothing could stop him. Every bullet bounced off of whatever armor he was wearing, and he ripped apart armored vehicles with ease. He wielded weapons that shredded through scores of mercenaries. He would never forget how he tore off the head of one of them and crushed it in his hand in front of the camera as a message to Nine. It was barbarism at its worst. He had to stop this mindless slaughter, but he was still tied up by the security system, and he could still feel one for all bleeding away. Nine and his lieutenants couldn't believe this was happening. His army of 9,870 highly trained hero killers was being decimated by one man. One man. He snuck past his tightly defended perimeter, destroyed his personal sub as well as half of their forces, and now he was reducing his men into piles of limbs. That man was out for him. He knew that all too well when he crushed the skull of one of his soldiers while glaring at him through the camera. "You fuck-ups," he heard Wolfram growl. 9 glared icily at the villain. "Would you care to repeat that? You bunch of fuck UPS." Wolfram raged. "I thought you were the best mercs in the world. How did this fucking lunatic slip past you? That's what we want to know. Whoever he is, he managed to circumvent our security system and turned it against us." Mummy defended. "But the question is, how did he do it?" Swordkill barked. "This place is supposed to be on par with Tartarus prison. I'm not sure of that myself." 9 began as he turned his gaze over to David, Melissa, and Sam. "But I do have a hunch. Bring them over here." He ordered Slice and Chimera. The two marched over to them, and the Wolfman socked Shields across the face before tossing him at 9's feet. Chimera then grabbed Melissa by her hair and dragged her over to her father, while Slice pulled out a Stare TMP from her holster and pointed it at Sam, who hastily got up. 9 grabbed David by the throat and hoisted him up so they could be at eye level. "We're going to have a little chat, Mr. Shields," 9 said threateningly as he held up his hand, which was now crackling with electricity. He shoved him over to Mummy, who wrapped up David's arms with his bandages. "Take him and the others to the server room," he ordered his lieutenants as they dragged them out of the ballroom. He then regarded his soldiers. "All of you take the elevator down to the main lobby and coordinate with our remaining forces to hunker down and defend the main tower. Have our entire tank division along with a contingent of our men advance on the lower quadrant so we can take back the airport and secure the hostages." "Understood, sir." The Sabres nodded. But all of the elevators are out due to the EMP dash. A bolt of lightning shot out of 9's hand and collided with the Sabre, killing him instantly while sending him flying into the far wall. "Then take the goddamn stairs," 9 shouted as the remaining Sabres ran out of the room. Looking at the steaming corpse of the soldier 9 just killed, Wolfram motioned Swordkill, Daigo, and Nobu to follow the Sabre lieutenants to the server room. He went over to his goons. "You all stay here and keep this room on lockdown. If any of these pricks try anything funny, plug M." The hired guns nodded and spread out around the ballroom while Wolfram left the room. 9 narrowed his eyes after he left and decided to head for the server room as well. Before he exited the room, he took one last glance at the screen showing his enemy pulling out a handheld railgun to vaporize the sniper teams on the rooftops. Why didn't he hear about this man a long time ago? Whatever his price was, it would have been worth it. Hero Public Safety Commission Headquarters Crisis Room. The HPSC president had her arms folded as she breathed through her nose. Sayaka Grant was an American/Japanese woman in the late 50s with steely blue eyes and slicked black ash-blonde hair. She wore a black suit with a blue dress underneath and maintained an air of professionalism. But that was starting to crack as beads of sweat formed on her head and her arms were shaking. Standing in a small private room, Sayaka looked out the room-length glass window at the rows of agents and tech analysts working at their consoles within a massive room. Or at least they would have if they weren't glued to the main screen in abject horror. Sayaka looked to the giant screen spanning the length of the room and felt her throat tighten. She mentally recapped how this entire situation came to this ghastly outcome. The Steel Sabres had seized Island and captured the symbol of peace along with pro-heroes from different countries, as well as the island's scientists and tourists. The HPSC was able to coordinate a perimeter alongside the JSDF and the Japanese government. They were in the middle of planning a method of infiltrating Island without the Sabres noticing, while also brainstorming on how the mercenaries were able to easily infiltrate the seafaring facility. When they concluded that it had to have been an inside job, they just got word that a random man wearing armor charged through the perimeter and put 5 pro-heroes in the hospital. Not only did they find out that he managed to escape, but it was the same vigilante who tore off the arm of the LOV leader. This had put everyone in the crisis room in a frenzy as they tried to make sense of what was happening until the Sabres hijacked the airwave across half the mainland of Japan to broadcast their demands. But when he appeared on screen, there were no words to describe what happened next. After the bloodbath, they had no time to catch their breaths when an explosion on the scale of a small atomic bomb destroyed half the entire island. Sayaka immediately ordered her technicians to activate their top-secret surveillance satellite so they could see what was happening on the island. They now had a bird-eye view of Island, and when they zoomed in, all they could see were the streets running red with blood. The vigilante was on a murderous rampage against the Sabres, shredding through them like they were paper. He didn't stop at all. He just kept killing and killing without pause. Several people had to leave the room or threw up all over their desks. Sitting herself down in her seat near the conference table, Sayaka buried her face in her hands as she heard the sounds of the sabers screaming as they were torn apart by the madman. Sitting not far from her wearing the same expression of horror was her top agent, Mara Yakumaru. Mara was a middle-aged man with messy beige hair and wore a formal black suit as per the HPSC dress code. His most discerning feature was the heavy bags under his eyes due to lack of sleep from overworking. Despite that, he was a well-regarded and proficient agent in the organization, being in charge of reviewing the performances of heroes and scoping out potential candidates for becoming pros. Not only that, but he had a sizable military career, spearheading multiple counter-villainy operations ending with a 100% success rate. His once sleepy eyes were fully awake and bugging out of his head as he watched the vigilante grab a saber by the leg and use him as a human club against the other mercs. Lips quivering, Mara glanced back to his laptop, which was scanning for any radioactive contamination since the detonation of the Saber's nuclear submarine. Completely clean. Not a single shred of radioactivity for miles. He should feel relieved, but what was driving him nuts was how. Looking over to Sayaka, Mara closed his laptop and walked over to her. He sighed, scratching the back of his head as he looked back at the monitor showing the one-sided shit show. Listen, it's a little risky, but I can get boots on the ground dash. We can't do anything until our government lifts the no-fly order. Sayaka interrupted, looking up at him. Mara couldn't believe what he was hearing. He let out a laugh of frustration. Oh, great. That's just perfect. Well, while we're sitting here twiddling our thumbs, Arnold Leatherface Schwarzenegger is turning Island into the set of a Quentin Tarantino movie. You think I don't want to end this insanity as much as you do? Sayaka snapped. For all we know, we could end up putting more innocent lives at risk if we start sending soldiers and heroes over there. The public dash. Oh right, the public. We certainly can't forget that they'll have fucking night terrors for the next 15 years after what they all saw on TV. Mara threw up his hands. Sayaka was about to reprimand him for his language when the phone on her desk began to ring with the voice of her receptionist coming through the speakerphone. Ma'am, the Prime Minister is on line 1. It's urgent. Sayaka's eyes widened. Mara almost lost his balance. The Prime Minister of Japan was calling them. Oh shit, Mara mumbled. You better have all your eggs in one basket for this one. Zip it. Sayaka pointed at him, shutting him up. Taking a deep breath and composing herself, the president of the HPSC picked up the receiver and answered. Hello, yes, I understand the severity of the situation. No, we don't know the identity of the vigilante, but we can confirm that he is fighting the Steel Sabers. We're unable to ascertain the safety of All Might and the hostages, but they will be our top priority to rescue. You have. I understand. I'll notify the authorities. Thank you, Prime Minister. She set the receiver down and faced Mara. He's just rescinded the lockdown and permitted us to coordinate with the JSDF and pro-heroes on a mission to retake the island. Let's get to work. Mara smiled broadly. Best news I've heard all day. The two of them went out the door leading to the main room with all present agents. Mara clapped his hands together to get everyone's attention. Okay, listen up, people. We dash. Suddenly, all of the computers in the room as well as the main monitor went completely black and nearly plunged the room into total darkness. They came back on after a few seconds, but this time, every screen showed a white background with a blue-colored symbol. It was a circle in the middle with 3 odd shapes around it. Before Sayaka could demand what was going on, the phone began to ring from inside the private room. A jingle was then heard through the ceiling speakers, and a message came up underneath the symbol on the monitors. Answer the phone. Sayaka and Mara numbly glanced at each other in shocked confusion before slowly heading back to the private rooms with all eyes on them. Some of the agents started to follow them. Now in the room, Sayaka cautiously reached for the ringing phone as Mara sweated nervously. The two nearly jumped out of their skins when a computerized voice spoke through the speakerphone. Hello. I have blocked off all communication access to the JSDF and authorities throughout your headquarters and other government institutions. For your safety, as well as the safety of the hostages, do not interfere with our operations. /W what? Sayaka breathed before she instantly became serious. Who is this? she demanded. Who I am is not relevant. But you have our assurance that the hostages and All Might will be rescued, and the Steel Sabers will plague Hero Society no more. Thank you for your time, .. The line went dead, and they were left absolutely stunned. Mara looked like his brain had just melted while Sayaka had to sit herself down. Pulling her handkerchief out of her pocket and wiping the sweat off her brow, the president of the HPSC now felt like the smallest person in the world. To be continued. Chapter 14. The Destroyer. Part 3. A swirling void of pure darkness was the first thing Midoriya could see when his eyes fluttered open. He tried moving his fingers, but he couldn't. Looking down at himself, he jolted in shock when he witnessed the black substance snaking around his entire body. Even his mouth was covered in it. Midoriya struggled as hard as he could to free himself from his bindings, but it was like he was submerged in cement. Fearing that this was the afterlife, Midoriya resigned himself to his fate until he noticed something that gave him pause. Up ahead were multiple silhouettes engulfed in shadow, staring at him with glowing yellow eyes. One of the figures began to march towards him. Oi, oi, oi. What the hell do you think you're doing, kid? As the apparition got closer, the darkness encompassing him began to dissipate, revealing a lanky, heavily muscled form of a man wearing leather pants, a biker jacket, shoulder pads, and an ammo belt draped across his chest. Only the figure's face was still obscured by shadow. It ain't over till it's over. So stop sitting around on your ass and get back in the fight. Island Central Tower, 3rd floor. Izuku's eyes shot open as a loud gasp escaped his throat. He was staring up at the ruined, partially caved-in ceiling of the employee rec room. He groaned as he picked himself off the ground while moving away the pieces of the ceiling on top of him. Standing on wobbly legs, Izuku looked around the partially darkened, dust-shrouded room with the only light being the moon shining through the broken window. He frantically searched for his friends who were most likely somewhere under the debris when an overhead light hanging by its wires shorted out and spat out sparks, briefly illuminating the room enough for Midoriya to spot the prone form of Uraraka lying on the ground. Gasping, he rushed to her side and gently lifted her up a little, being as careful as he could. Uraraka, are you okay? Speak to me. No answer. She was unmoving. Setting her back down again, Izuku's mind was racing as he tried to think of what he could do. He suddenly thought back to CPR class with Recovery Girl back at UA, and though the thought of mouth-to-mouth caused his face to turn red, he knew the gravity of the situation and steeled himself. Placing his hands on the center of her chest, Midoriya began compressing Uraraka's chest at a steady pace, stopping once to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. After a few more compressions, Ochako began to cough and slowly opened her eyes. The first thing that came into her vision was Izuku, relieved that she regained consciousness. DKU, Uraraka shouted, overjoyed as she shot up and wrapped her arms around Midoriya in a tight hug. I'm so happy you're okay. Izuku was as red as a tomato. Why, yeah, so am I. He patted her back and made a mental note not to mention anything about the brief, indirect kiss. The sound of someone groaning caught their attention, and they looked to the right to see Shoto and Mirio slowly getting up and covered in dust. Guys, Mirio was elated to see the others safe and sound. Are you hurt anywhere? We're fine. Izuku nodded. What about you guys? We've felt worse. Shoto responded, shaking his head a little to dispel the dizziness. What about Kirishima and Bakugo? Uraraka asked out of concern as Mirio and Shoto began to look around. The sound of clattering was heard in the back, and everyone witnessed Kirishima using his hardening quirk to rip away the debris on the ground. Guys, get over here. Bakugo's hurt real bad. He shouted as he frantically threw away the broken pieces of the ceiling from his friend. Everyone immediately began helping Kirishima until they finally found an unconscious Bakugo with blood covering his face and barely breathing. Kaken, Izuku exclaimed. Get him on the couch. Quick. Shoto hurriedly advised as Mirio and Kirishima quickly picked him up and carried him over to the furniture. Uraraka grabbed the first aid kit hanging on the wall, while Izuku grabbed a bottle of water and a towel by the sink. Once Bakugo was on the couch, Izuku poured water on the towel and wiped away the blood while Uraraka got out the bandages and a bottle of antiseptic. Mirio took a closer look at Bakugo, trying to find where the wound was. Good news. It's not as bad as it looks. An elated Mirio announced when he found the wound amongst the tufts of Katsuki's spiky hair. It's just a tiny cut. I should be able to patch it up in no time flat. But wasn't he covered in blood? Uraraka questioned as she handed Mirio the bandages and antiseptic. Minor cuts on the head bleed heavily because there are lots of blood vessels around the face and scalp that are very close to the skin. So while it did look bad, it's just a small scrape. Mirio lectured as he dabbed some antiseptic onto the wound. Bakugo winced a little as Mirio began to wrap the bandages around his head. He'll be fine, but he's going to be out of it for a while. Kirishima leaned in close next to Izuku. You just know he's going to be pissed when he wakes up, he whispered. Izuku sighed in resignation. Hey, do you all hear that? Shoto said, looking around. Everyone stayed silent and listened closely. Their ears began to pick up the unmistakable sounds of gunfire and explosions. Moving towards the shattered window, the others went over to look outside while Mirio tended to Bakugo. From far away over in the Expo district, they could see columns of smoke and fire along with tracer fire streaking into the midnight sky. Their jaws agape. Their bewilderment soon turned to fear when they heard the sounds of screaming amongst the mercenaries. Then it all came back to them. The horror they saw unfold before their eyes on television. It was him. GGG guys, Kirishima stammered as he looked down at the streets below. They all followed his gaze and saw a literal river of blood flowing through the streets with the sabers in various states of bodily dismemberment floating in the proverbial river Styx. They all reeled back inside. Midoriya was instantly on his knees, dry heaving as sweat poured down his head. Kirishima staggered backward, clutching the sides of his head and muttering panicked denials. Shoto slumped against the wall, utterly terrified beyond comprehension for the first time in his life. Uraraka was taking it the worst. She was on her hands and knees, profusely vomiting with tears running down her round cheeks. What's wrong? What's going on out there? Mirio asked out of concern, and he went over to the window and leaned his head out. No, Shoto quickly yelled. No, don't dash. Mirio gasped in horror and stumbled back into the room with an expression of terror written all over his face. He clamped his hands over his mouth as his legs wobbled uncontrollably. Izuku stopped dry heaving and clutched his chest, feeling his own beating heart against his chest. His eyes found their way over to Uraraka, who was now shaking as her fingers dug into the carpet. Oh, Chaco. Izuku worriedly placed a hand on her shoulder. Uraraka let a small gasp as she spun her head around to Izuku. Their eyes locked on each other as Midoriya saw just how scared she was. Uraraka's face scrunched up, and she suddenly latched onto Izuku, squeezing him as tight as she could as he buried her face into his chest while softly weeping. Midoriya was taken aback by this. Not because he was flustered that a girl was hugging him. It was because he realized just how bad her trauma was. Island Expo District, 9 hours earlier. Post-traumatic stress disorder? It's really that bad? Izuku gulped nervously. We think so. Ever since she saw that vigilante rip off Tamura's arm, she's been jumping at shadows left and right. She barely looks at us, or even speaks to us. Momo explained, feeling terrible for Ochako. But for some reason, she seems to lighten up a little around you, so maybe you should try and talk to her. And now, try to comfort her and let her know we're there for her. Jiro suggested. Well, Dash. Come on, Izuku. She needs this. Island Central Tower present time. Izuku slowly began to bring up his hands and gently held Uraraka. He knew that this wasn't the best time to try and talk to her as he too had the same feeling of terror she was experiencing. All he could do was let her know that she wasn't alone. As he hugged her back, the sounds of warfare still echoed in the distance, and Midoriya prayed that this nightmare would soon be over. Island Expo District. Sonic Mayhem Quad Machine. No Temura Mal Alguno. No Temura Mal Alguno. No Temura Mal Alguno. Heedless of the Saber's terrified babbling, the Doomslayer grabbed him by the scruff of his uniform and hoisted him off the ground. I have tapped into the Central Tower's communications room and have blocked off any attempts for the government and pro-heroes to attempt to intervene. No one will impede you, Fantastic. Aeawawa. Help me. Hell dash. And he then slammed the merc into the pavement, his fist bursting apart his lungs and causing blood to erupt from his mouth like a geyser. The Slayer stood himself up and watched the army of sabers flee for their lives away from him. Behind him was a scene of carnage and fire. Piles of dead sabers and destroyed APCs littered the scenic gardens of the Expo district. Many of the lush flowers were either set ablaze or smeared with blood. Displays that showcased brand new inventions or support items were reduced to twisted heaps of metal from the Slayer's weapons. Speaking of weapons, the Doomslayer noticed the ammo counter on his HUD showing that he had halved most of his reserves. Guess he got a little too overzealous with his slaughter of the steel sabers. He didn't think he would end up chewing through his ammunition this quick in such a short time. But this minor inconvenience only gave him an idea. He could use the sabers' own weaponry against them. Spotting two GEM-134 miniguns near a destroyed ammo depot the sabers set up, the Slayer picked them up and wielded them both in his hands. Eyeing the retreating mercenaries, the Slayer bolted forward as the ammo belts for the miniguns trailed behind him. He easily hefted up both weapons and unleashed hell upon the sabers. The minigun carved through them like a sickle. Not a single merc was spared as they continued to retreat, many of them dropping their weapons as they fled the hopeless battle. But the Slayer was fresh out of mercy as he pursued them with both guns blazing. He gunned down any saber that was caught in his sight and made sure none of them escaped his wrath. To his amusement, several of them stopped running to fire back in some futile act of defiance. But it was all for naught as the Doomslayer charged through their ranks in a relentless barrage of gunfire that tore them to ribbons. The minigun soon ran dry, and he chucked one away while he clubbed the other one against a saber's skull before discarding it. Entering the dining pavilion, the Slayer spotted a discarded M2 Browning HMG near another barricade. A saber was already manning the weapon, but before he could fire, the Slayer grabbed him by the face and tore it off along with his gas mask. The saber screeched as he grabbed his bleeding visage until the Slayer had butt him, popping the skull like a zit. Hefting up the HMG, the Slayer gripped the barrel while his other hand clutched the spade grip where the trigger was. Turning towards a group of sabers attempting to attack him, the Slayer blasted them apart. 50 caliber ammunition tore through their bulletproof vests like wet paper. He resumed his chase of the retreating sabers as he swept the HMG left and right at any merc unlucky enough to be within his field of view. The armor-piercing rounds penetrated through their ranks as the M2 Browning roared its ammunition from its glowing hot barrel. Many mercenaries hid behind whatever cover they could find, but the rounds obliterated them so hard that their bodies became human salsa. His HUD showed the remaining sabers had retreated into a large building that housed some of the most recently unveiled support items. He ran towards the building ahead just in time to see an APC parked in front of the entrance with its turret aimed right at him. The Slayer never gave the gunner time to fire as he unloaded the rest of the HMG into the vehicle, the piercing ammo easily shredding through it and killing the occupants inside. Once the last of its ammunition had been expended, the Doomslayer hurled the HMG like a javelin at the sabers behind the sandbags and succeeded in impaling two of them in a row. Hopping up onto the ruined APC, the Slayer ripped off its still-functioning 30mm turret and grabbed the wires running into it. Giving it a tight tug, a 30mm round exploded out of the barrel and tore straight through several retreating sabers and drilling through the steel columns and walls of the building. He walked through the luminescent blue halls of the hero item building, blasting away the sabers as they returned fire upon him. His quick, short tugs of the wires sent salvos of death at the mercenaries who were blown apart, painting the walls and floor with their body parts. The rounds that hit the numerous support items caused explosions to ripple throughout the building, killing any saber caught in the blast radius and setting fire to the displays. In the eyes of the sabers, the Doomslayer was the personification of the Grim Reaper, and the handheld cannon was his scythe. The sounds of heavy, mechanical footsteps echoed through the halls, and a huge shape crashed through the wall next to the Slayer. He whirled around and fired the 30mm cannon, but was backhanded halfway across the room and smashed into a display case containing a red-colored surveillance drone. Quickly picking himself back up, the Slayer was treated with the sight of two bulky mechs, each of them roughly the size of an elephant. They had a yellow and black color scheme with ocular sensors installed on the shoulders where their heads would be. Their bodies were large and dome-like, standing atop powerful hind legs while their arms had been replaced with construction equipment. The first mech had a wrecking ball and a giant jackhammer, while the second one was equipped with a chain trencher and a rock wheel. The Slayer raised an eyebrow. It was almost like he was facing mechanical versions of the Hell Guards. "See? I told you we'd get these stupid things working." A voice blared from the speakers mounted on the first mech. "Whatever. This is where it ends, you freak. They're gonna scrape what's left of you into a shoe box." The second mech boasted as its saws thrummed to life. A group of sabers who were hiding behind a toppled column began cheering. But their revelry was cut short when the doomslayer unloaded the rest of the 30mm cannon's ammo into the group and turned them into gibs. The Slayer tossed away the cannon and cracked his knuckles. My scans indicate they have repurposed these exosuits for combative purposes. Their original function was to primarily assist in construction. They were created under the request of the pro-hero power loader for use in his agency and company, Power Loader Construction, / The Slayer cared not for the info as he charged at the mechs who lumbered towards him. The first mech swung its wrecking ball at the Doomslayer, who easily caught it and flung it along with the mech right over his shoulder like it weighed absolutely nothing. As the first mech collided into the wall, the second mech swung its rock wheel at the Slayer in an attempt to cut him in half. The Slayer punched the saw into pieces with one blow, followed up by slamming his foot into the mech's right leg and destroying the servo motors. The mech fell to one knee, and the Slayer easily tore the chain trencher right off of its arm and swung it down onto the dome, easily carving through it and instantly killing the saber piloting it. The second mech got back up and swung its wrecking ball at him again, but one punch from the Slayer shattered it like it was made of glass. In a last-ditch attempt, the mech thrust its jackhammer at the Slayer, but he instantly caught it and wrenched it off of its arm. He smashed the jackhammer against the mech's body and then ran it through with its own weapon, the still hammering tool puncturing into the cockpit and mulching the pilot. As the exosuit slumped over with the jackhammer still impaled through it, the Slayer's shoulders sagged a little in disappointment. Well, that was pathetically easy. The Hell Guards were way tougher than these cheap knockoffs. His HUD pinpointed the last two remaining sabers left in the Expo District were not far from his position. In fact, they were already in the building. The two sabers, Marley and Cruz, ran down the small hallway towards the emergency exit. They tried to open the door, but it was locked, much to their confusion. "Why the fuck isn't it opening?" Marley yelled in frustration. "I don't know." Cruz panicked as he banged on the keypad on the side of the door. "Something's forcing the electronic lock to dash." Cruz's head suddenly exploded, showering Marley with blood and pieces of gray matter. The headless body slumped against the door, and Marley shakily looked down the hallway to see Tango Primary slowly walking towards him with a smoking double barrel in his hands. Marley raised his MG4 at the Slayer, but could not find the will to pull the trigger. The Doomslayer continued to inch closer and closer until Marley finally gave up and threw away the gun. "Wait, don't fucking shoot me," he shouted as he raised his hands into the air. "I give up. See, I surrender." Unfortunately for Marley, this had the exact opposite effect. It made the Slayer angrier. He reloaded his super shotgun while matching up to the merc with murderous intent. The saber fell to his knees with his arms still raised as the Doomslayer pushed the barrel of his weapon up against his forehead. No. What the fuck? I don't want to fight anymore. I give up." Marley screamed as he felt the still hot barrels of the sawed-off burn his forehead. The Slayer felt his anger increasing with each pitiful plea that came from the merc's mouth. After everything this organization had done to heroes worldwide, one of them wanted to surrender? How many heroes were gunned down without mercy? How many families did they ruin? How many young heroes had their lives cut way too short because of them? How many heroes begged for their life only to be put down like they were some kind of rare game? The Steel Sabers did not deserve mercy. None of them did. "Come on, man. Just let me go, and I promise I'll turn over a new leaf, please dash." The deafening sound of buckshot filled the hallway as Marley's head was reduced to red mist and splattered what was left of his skull onto the walls when the Slayer fired his super shotgun point-blank into his face. Pushing over the dead body with his foot, the Slayer turned around and walked back to the atrium as his HUD showed the total number of sabers left on I Island. 1,156 remaining. I have scanned the building and discovered several support items that were unaffected by the EMP. We could utilize some of them to our advantage in this universe. Support items? The slayer then snapped his fingers. He had completely forgotten his other objective while fighting the sabers. Island exterior. Beneath the lapping waves outside of the protective wall surrounding the island, a massive creature surged beneath the surface. At first, it looked like a gigantic sperm whale, but this particular one had ape-like arms and legs. It dove deeper into the depths until it reached the metallic underbelly of Island. Spotting a hole torn open on the underside from the explosion earlier, the whale charged through the opening and breached itself into the island. Popping its girthy head out of the water, the first thing it saw was a column of fire reaching up into the sky as it billowed forth from the ruined industrial district. Spotting a place where it could dispense its cargo in the central quadrant of Island, the whale opened its gigantic maw and a sphere made out of ash floated out of its mouth. The sphere floated down to the street littered with craters and dissipated to reveal 3 villains working for the LOV and Inomo. Maguma Iwata was a burly giant of a man wearing a dark blue bodysuit and a gas mask along with gauntlets, shoulder pads, and boots that resembled superheated stone. His hair was a fiery orange and steam could be seen coming out of the pores on his shoulder pads. His quirk allowed him to produce and control liquid magma with skillful and deadly ease. Known by his villain name Volcano, he was infamous for decimating Esaha City years ago and leading a band of robbers known as the Volcano Thieves. Now he and his cohorts worked for All for One, a job they embraced with pride. Kanako Heizono, also known as Dusty Ash, was a tall and voluptuous woman wearing highly revealing attire. It consisted of a black low-cut sports bra, back ankle boots, a utility belt with garters, black gloves, and light purple panties. Her white hair was wavy and done up in a ponytail. She wore a transparent eye mask along with a respirator around her neck and wielded a club in the shape of a ninjato that hung off her belt. Her quirk allowed her to produce volcanic ash from her body and shape it at will into a variety of uses. Samuji Kazutani was the strangest thing on 2 legs. Some naysayers would say that mutation-type quirks were a burden, but as some heroes or villains would prove, never judge a book by its cover. His skin was orange-colored. His overall body shape was incredibly lanky. His face gave him the appearance of a duck, while his elongated fingers resembled fan blades. He wore a black sleeveless unitard with a purple belt, turquoise sneakers with tiny fans attached to the back of them, and goggles to protect his eyes during combat. He also wore a backpack that would unfold into a large office fan that would enhance his abilities. His quirk earned him the villain name Gust Boy, which gave him the ability to rotate his fingers or wrists to produce powerful gusts of wind, even tornadoes. To better fit with his theme, Samuji had his bluish-gray hair done up in a ponytail while stylized to look like fan blades. And then, of course, there was the Nomu itself. It was a hunched-over creature with light green skin, shredded jeans, and 8 limbs that were either absurdly muscular or horribly atrophied. His main arms were incredibly long and malnourished, but the 6 arms growing out of his back were anything but. They were beefy and veiny, but also came attached with weapons jutting out of them. 4 of them were chainsaws, 1 was a drill, while the last one was a simple claw hammer. Its grotesque head was encased in an armored, purple-colored helmet with red visors, and it had a metallic gag in its mouth. Clutched in its main arms was a metallic, cylindrical device with boosters attached to the bottom and the sides. The whale creature began to climb onto the street, its size nearly dwarfing the buildings. Then it hunkered down and began to morph like clay into a human being. The transformation ended and the beast was now a man wearing a black dress suit and black pants, designer shoes, and a large fur coat that was colored white. His face was a mishmash between 2 different species. On his right side, his face was human with unkempt black hair and baggy, soulless eyes, while his left half had a black texture akin to that of a whale, an enlarged eye that was askew, white hair, and a noticeable underbite with razor-sharp teeth. Pressing a small button on the metallic collar he wore, it began to unfurl itself into a helmet-like attachment that covered the disfigured side of his face. It resembled an old diving helmet with metallic barnacles at the top of the dome. This man was Curator, All for One's most dedicated, proficient, and fanatically loyal agent whose obedience to his master was on par with Kurogiri and Dr. Garaki. His quirk gave him the abilities of a sperm whale, even transforming into a massive, ape-like whale monster. breathing in and exhaling. Curator surveyed the devastation before him. It was like a small war had been waged here if the smell of death and blood in the air was any indication. Looking to his left, he saw a pile of saber corpses with a lake of blood around them along with several APCs reduced to the burning wreckage. The volcano thieves were disturbed by the gruesome sight, while the Nomu just stared in the other direction vacantly. Fuck me. Volcano swore under his breath. How the hell did we not see this guy coming? Dusty Ash folded her arms as she swallowed. First he tears off Tamura's arm, pulverizes several pros, and now he's waging World War III? I'm not sure even a vigilante is capable of killing this many hired guns. Not to mention those are the steel sabers. Gus Boy added, best of the best, my ass. I told Wolfram that some of our own would be more than capable of handling this. Yeah, but how were we supposed to know our vigilante would get here? Maybe you didn't consider that little tidbit, eh? Dusty Ash nudged him teasingly. Gus Boy looked away, pouting. Volcano walked up next to Curator. It's pretty quiet. Chances are he's either taking a break or he's already killed them all. What's our game plan? Curator remained silent as he looked down at the bisected remains of a saber. To single-handedly challenge the most infamous band of mercenaries in the world and cause them significant losses was a feat unheard of. In the span of a few short hours, this man had already garnered his master's attention far quicker than anyone, and it wasn't hard to see why. All for One had replaced his plan to recruit that mentally unstable brat who won the sports festival in favor of possibly welcoming this man into the LOV. However, one could not forget how he dismembered Shigaraki, and there was a chance that this man would refuse the offer. Curator shared All for One's dislike of vigilantes and knew a man this dangerous had to be eliminated but focused on the task at hand. The vigilante isn't our concern at the moment. Curator spoke, his voice taking on a metallic tone due to his helmet. For now we will focus on our objective. Chainsaw. The package. The Nomu lurched forward and set the device on the ground. It opened up automatically to reveal 4 tubes containing multiple orbs filled with a yellow liquid and attached via a set of strings. Around the tubes was an array of wires and clockwork-based mechanisms. Dusty Ash and Gust Boy knelt down to get a closer look. Gust Boy whistled. Didn't think the boss would break this thing out so soon. A weapon like this is pretty hard to come by these days. Consider it the definition of Pyrrhic victory. If our plans do fail here, we will demoralize society when they watch the people and heroes they were supposed to save die a slow death. Curator explained with a hint of sadistic glee. And if All Might survives? Volcano questioned. It will be of no consequence. We will deal with him at another time when the opportunity presents itself. Curator waved his hand as he turned to Kanako. Dusty Ash, take us to the roof. You and Gust Boy will arm the package while Volcano, Chainsaw, and I will meet with Wolfram. I want to see how he'll explain himself this time. Dusty Ash summoned a large cloud of ash from her skin and formed a massive disc in the center of the street. Everyone stepped onto the platform, with Gust Boy carrying the package. Dusty Ash smiled slyly as she snapped her fingers. Elevator up. The disc floated upwards and began to fly itself to the roof with its passengers in tow. Volcano glanced over his shoulder to look at Chainsaw, who was breathing heavily with saliva dripping from its gagged mouth. Gust Boy and Dusty Ash, grossed out by this display, took several steps away from it. Volcano rolled his eyes and looked up at the approaching tower of Island. Did we really have to bring a middle-tier Noma with us? I feel like we would have been better off with Kurogiri or one of the high-ends the doctor is futzing with. He voiced his opinion to Curator. We have 6 complete candidates, but Garaki is still applying the finishing touches. Kurogiri is currently undergoing a mission, but Chainsaw will be more than capable of assisting us. Curator assured him with confidence. Volcano looked to his left and took in the sight of a river of blood flowing through the streets with thousands of dead sabers bobbing along the surface. I doubt it, he thought to himself grimly. Island Expo District several minutes earlier. Sonic mayhem crashed up again. The Slayer walked through the decimated halls of the Hero Item building until he kicked open the doors leading to another pavilion, which was somewhat undamaged from the 30mm rounds. Some of the support items in this exhibition were made with mu metal. It is an insulated ferromagnetic alloy with high resistance to electricity. They were protected by the EMP. The main vault in Island's central tower contains far more advanced support items, but I have located 2 inventions within this exhibition that will be useful to us. Marking them on your HUD now, slash. The doomslayer walked past the displays until he come upon the first item on his list in its case. It was a black cuboid with transparent windows on the sides, a slot in the front, and several buttons located at the top. Slash, this support item is known as an energy replicator. It is a recently made invention created to harness the power of energy-type quirk users and convert it into clean energy based on the quirk's abilities. With the right alterations, we may be able to convert it into a fabricator for argent-free plasma energy, slash. Now that was useful, and no argent energy was a big plus. He didn't want this world harnessing that energy after everything that happened on the alternate Mars. He plucked the support item from its display case and pocketed it into his hammerspace backpack. Moving on, he walked through the room a little bit more until he came to another display case that held his second item. It was a red-colored disc with 4 metallic pads on the front with a touchscreen display on the sides. Slash, this item was based on a cloning quirk belonging to a Canadian pro hero. While it is still in its prototype phase, it can clone inorganic material or objects at the molecular and atomic levels. Adjustments to this device will enhance its capabilities. It could easily create more ammunition for your weapons, including UAC-based munitions, slash. Again, another nifty little toy that would be a huge help. Looks like he wouldn't have to worry about running out of ammo once Vega was done with the tune-ups. Snagging another invention and dispensing it into his backpack, the Slayer began to head towards the exit until Vega chimed in with an update. Slash, Slayer, 5 villains have just arrived on the island. I can confirm that they are with the League of Villains, slash. His HUD showed camera footage of the crooks Vega was talking about. He memorized their appearances as Vega brought up info on them by accessing the criminal database from the HPSC computers. 3 of them were thieves who disappeared a few years ago while there was no info on the green creature. What kind of fucked up quirk did that one have? However, the information on the man with the fur coat caught his interest and malice. Isena Ushimitsudoki was born into a wealthy family, but was passed over by his far more successful brother. When he reached his teens, he murdered his parents and brother in a staged traffic accident so he could claim their fortune. After several years, private investigators discovered the truth behind the plot, and Isana was arrested, but not before killing several officers and a pro hero with his quirk. He was en route to a highly secure prison for dangerous villains, but the prison van that was transporting him never arrived and was found destroyed with Isana missing and his police escort dead. He was never seen again, but it was clear to the Slayer that the LOV most likely busted him out, and he had now joined up with them. The Slayer made himself a reminder to make this guy's death slow. Slash, I have acquired new details about the organization from their conversations. They are preparing a potential weapon of mass destruction to erase any evidence of their activities here, and a person, whom they call All for One, is the true leader of the League of Villains. This has left me to conclude that Tamura Shigaraki is only a figurehead, slash. The Slayer folded his arms and tapped his finger against them in thought. So that's how it was. Pull the strings from the shadows, but let some unlucky sap take all the heat. But that had to be the dumbest name for a supervillain he had ever heard of. Couldn't this All for One have picked out something more threatening? Besides that, the Slayer wondered what this WMD was. Whatever it was capable of, the Slayer knew it had to be destroyed, and those LOV fuckers needed to die. He decided that he would head back to the central tower, kill the Sabers as well as 9, then kill the LOV and dismantle whatever the package was. Slash update. The Sabers are mobilizing a tank division at the central quadrant. 9 has ordered them to rendezvous with the remaining squads at the lower quadrant near the airport. They are attempting to retake the hostages, slash. The Doomslayer clenched his teeth in anger. He knew that Nijire and Tamaki would stand no chance against those mercenaries, and the hostages would be in danger again. Change of plans. Kill the rest of the Steel Sabers, tear 9 and his lieutenants into pieces, then take out the LOV members and scrap the bomb. But he needed a way to get there, and quickly before the tanks came. Slash, I have located a vehicle that will transport you to the lower quadrant. On your right, slash. The Slayer turned in the direction Vega was pointing him towards to spot a sizable blue aircraft with a sleek, arrow-like design and white-colored wings that resembled the fins of a fish. A jet engine was installed into the other end of the craft with smaller, transparent fins around it. This reconnaissance craft is designed to function as both a jet and a miniature submersible. It is made of the same metal as the support items, and it has a full tank of fuel. This will allow you to arrive at your destination quickly. Good enough for him. The Slayer went up to the aircraft, popped open the hatch, and climbed inside. Vega easily accessed the system, and the craft began its startup procedures. While this was happening, the Slayer heard something activating next to the ship and glanced to his right. It was another large construction mech, only this one did not resemble the exosuits he fought earlier. It was far bigger, roughly the size of a 3-story house, and had a gray and white color scheme. The body stood atop 4 curved legs that ended in massive multidirectional wheels, while its arms consisted of massive, hydraulic grapple claws meant for demolition. Its head stuck out of the chest area and had a single green visor stretching along its length, giving the impression that it was meant to be remotely piloted. The visor glowed brightly, and the mech came to life, busting out of its restraints with ease and wheeling itself next to the jet. I have hacked this construction drone to assist you in the lower quadrant. I have concluded from our operations on this island that we are stronger together, and I now seek to directly aid you in any way I can. The Slayer didn't think it was possible that Vega would be helping him like this. He really was growing out of his limitations as an AI and taking a more hands-on approach to a situation rather than just advising him back on Mars and doing some minor hacking. But he had zero problems with this and gave the mech a thumbs up. He wished he could see the look on Hayden's face if he ever saw his formerly obedient creation kicking ass. With the startup procedures complete, the Doomslayer took the center stick and guided the craft upwards while the mech rumbled out of the room. Outside of the building, the front entrance exploded into rubble when the mech charged through it just as the aircraft burst forth from the roof and into the sky. The jet flew to the lower quadrant while the mech sped out of the Expo District and drove across the adjacent bridge that led to the lower quadrant. The Doomslayer had already arrived before Vega's mech and could already see a large mass of Saber all gathered in the center of the quadrant with a few groups heading towards the airport. The Slayer maneuvered his craft to the airport entrance, made a sharp right, and flew right towards the group of approaching Sabers. The Merc saw it coming and quickly retreated, but it didn't help them when the Slayer hit the throttle and mowed straight through the group. The Sabers were either sliced in half by the wings, impaled by the nose cone, or pulverized against the hull and windshield due to how fast it was going. The jet was now nearing the main group, who were about to open fire at the craft until Vega's mech arrived, plowing through a small building and running over the massive Sabers. They were grinded underneath its treaded wheels or swatted aside like bowling pins by its hydraulic arms, the force of the blows breaking every bone in their bodies. Some of them were scooped up in its powerful claws and crushed like nectarines with their blood pouring into the streets. The jet barreled through more Sabers until it collided with an APC and exploded in a ball of fire that engulfed several mercs in searing flames. The Slayer, who easily survived the explosion without a scratch, kicked open the hatch and witnessed the mech smashing the Sabers into paste while the Sabers unleashed their weapons upon the mech. Several Sabers spotted the Doomslayer and fired at him in terror, but then he, in a rare moment of creativity, grabbed 2 large chunks of rubble and charged at the hapless criminals, pulping the skull of one and then knocking off the jaw of another before throwing himself into the crowd with the mech wreaking havoc. The Slayer smirked as he swung the repurposed handful of solid stone down upon a Saber's face, so hard it caved his entire head in. This was going to be a great warm-up for what he had in store for 9 and the League of Villains. To be continued. Chapter 15. The Destroyer. Part 4. Island's Central Tower main server room. Sweat ran down David's face as he feverishly worked at the console, while Wolfram impatiently paced behind his back. What was supposed to be a foolproof plan to restore All Might's quirk had turned into something out of his worst nightmare. The supposed actors that Sam hired to aid them in obtaining the quirk amplification headset for All Might were working for the League of Villains, and they had hired the Steel Sabers to overtake the entire island. He was such a fool. In his maddened desire to save his longtime idol, he never considered the possibility of All for One targeting him since he was Yagi's friend. And now he was paying for his hubris by recklessly endangering everyone on the island, including his daughter. And now this was happening. An unknown, heavily armored man wielding advanced weaponry that was decades ahead of anything Island's R&D could produce, was on a bloody warpath against the Sabres. David watched the man destroy half the island and slaughter the mercenaries without the slightest bit of hesitation or mercy. But the horrors that were unfolding on the island were nothing compared to the situation he faced now. Earlier, he was dragged into the main server room by 9 in order to circumvent the program that was jamming communications and turning the previously hacked security system against them. What made matters worse, they were threatening to kill Melissa and Sam if he didn't get the system under their control. The multitude of villains in the room hovering over his shoulder wasn't helping. "I hope you've made some manner of progress, Mr. Shield." 9 pressed the barrel of his Taurus Raging Judge revolver up against the back of David's head. No, I haven't." David hesitantly answered before an agitated Wolfram grabbed him by the collar of his suit and whirled him around to face the villain. "Don't play dumb with us, you little shit." Wolfram raged into David's face. "You were fucking with us the whole time, so you downloaded a backup program and snuck that psycho here to derail everything." "I didn't. I don't even know who he is," David professed. "Then stop wasting our time and override the damn program," 9 ordered as he pointed his weapon at Shield again. I can't access or bypass it. This program is like nothing I've ever seen before," David hastily explained. "That's not the answer we wanted, Shield," 9 said darkly as he nodded to Mummy. "Does your daughter matter that little to you?" The bandaged lieutenant walked over to Melissa and Sam, who was backed up against the far wall. Mummy snatched Melissa by her wrist and dragged her over to her father. Forcing her down on her knees, he grabbed her by the hair and lifted her head up to unsheath his serrated short sword, holding it against her neck. "Melissa." David ran towards her only to be slugged right in the stomach by Daigo. He crumpled into a heap as he reached out for his daughter in an act of futility, reminded again his fanaticism for All Might made this happen. "No," he pleaded before Wolfram stomped on his hand and pointed his H&K USP match at his head. "You better get this shit fixed, or so help me I'll shoot you and your little girl right between the eyes," Wolfram ordered angrily. David grit his teeth as Wolfram ground his foot onto David's hand. "Daddy," Melissa whimpered right before her eyes became fierce. "Don't give them anything." "Oh, looks like she's got some spunk," Wolfram mocked as he pointed his gun at her. "Let's see if all that sass can outsmart a bullet." "No," David all but screamed as the barrel of the weapon was pressed against her daughter's head. "Please." Boss," came a voice from the other end of the room. Everyone turned to the source of the voice to see one of Wolfram's lackeys, Specs, standing at the door. Specs was around the same height as Swordkill and dressed in the same combat fatigues as the others. He had long pale hair and wore metallic goggles that enhanced his bullet eye quirk. "What the hell are you doing here, Specs?" Wolfram barked. "You were supposed to stay with the chopper. The chopper's fried. All of the electronics are shot to shit, but that's not why I'm here." He moved out of the way to reveal 3 figures entering the room. Wolfram's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. "Hello, Wolfram." "CCC Curator?" Wolfram fumbled over his words in shock. "Oh shit." Nobu mumbled as he, Daigo, and Swordkill backed away when they laid eyes on Volcano and Anomo. Curator was second in command of the LOV and was just as scary as All for One. If he was here, then it meant they really screwed up. "Who are you?" 9 demanded as his lieutenants looked ready to strike. "I believe Wolfram just said my name." Curator answered in a condescending, matter-of-factly tone. "I'm with the League of Villains. We're here to clean up his little mess. Feel free to leave whenever you want." "Just what makes you think you can start ordering us around?" Chimera bared his teeth, and he stomped over to him. He didn't get far when Volcano and Chainsaw stepped in front of him, barring his path. "I'd sit if I were you, little doggy." Volcano taunted with his arms folded while the Nomu let out a snarl. Chimera growled while Slice came up next to him, her hair hardening into quills. Mummy released Melissa and got into a fighting stance when Chainsaw turned around and glared at him. "Well, what do you mean, clean up my mess?" Wolfram demanded. "Isn't it obvious? Your mission here has failed, and All for One has transferred control of this operation to me," Curator revealed, sounding like Wolfram was beneath him. "You'll follow my orders from now on." But I can still salvage this," Wolfram claimed. "How was I supposed to know this guy would come here and fuck everything up?" He pointed towards one of the monitors showing the vigilante, as well as a construction mech inexplicably butchering the sabers on a rampage. I distinctly remember Kurojiri informing you about this man yesterday, and we told you to be on your guard due to the important nature of this mission. Curator lectured him. You knew about this maniac? Slice shouted at Wolfram as Chimera and Mummy gave him scathing glares. Wolfram was about to clear up any misconceptions when Nine marched right up to Wolfram, the armor underneath his suit lighting up and crackling with electricity. He grabbed Wolfram by the neck and brought up his right hand, the armor around his wrist shooting out curved wrist blades. Is there anything else you haven't told us, Wolfram? Nine demanded from him, his tone of voice rising. Any further memory lapses, or oversights perhaps? I'm telling you, I didn't know that guy would fucking come here. Wolfram gagged as Nine's grip on his throat tightened. Nine raised his right arm and was about to stab Wolfram through the head when Curator gently placed his hand on the mercenary leader's arm. There's no need for any unnecessary violence, Nine. The League of Villains will take full responsibility for Wolfram's blunder and will ensure the Steel Sabers are fully compensated for this unfortunate turn of events. Curator calm Nine. Compensation? Mummy furiously exclaimed. Half of our entire organization is dead because of that thing. Glaring at Wolfram, Nine dropped him to the floor and turned towards the monitors. He clenched his fist as he watched the armored man continue to decimate his army. All of this could have been prevented if Wolfram had informed them about this man earlier, allowing them to set up tighter patrols and intercept him. But whatever the tactic, they would stand no chance against him. This walking natural disaster had made an utter mockery of the Steel Sabers in just a few hours. Nothing could slow him down, his frustration over the situation reaching new heights. Nine swore he would have this man's head. Island Lower Quadrant. Quake 3, Frontline Assembly 02 Long. The Doomslayer threw a saber against a ruined APC and slammed his Boothiel into his face, splattering brain matter across the hull, while the mech grabbed a cluster of sabers and threw them with enough force to shatter their bodies apart against the buildings. The Slayer scooped up an MG7 and began gunning down the mercenaries with quick bursts. The ground was littered with slaughtered sabers as more fell victim to the Slayer and Vega. 433 remaining. The Slayer scored multiple kills against the sabers as he casually walked amongst the piles of dead bodies he was piling up. Despite the sheer number of losses, the sabers still attempted to open fire upon the Slayer, but it was all for naught as nothing they had could even dent his Predator suit. Throwing away the now empty light machine gun, the Slayer plunged his fist into the back of a fleeing saber and tightly gripped his spine before flipping the goon over his head and slamming him down into the ground with enough force to fold him in half. Another saber rushed at him with a knife only for the Slayer to break his arm, tear out a piece of his ribcage out of his body, and plunge it into his eye. Two sabers ran up to him from behind and unloaded their automatic shotguns into his back. The Doomslayer spun around and dispatched the first one by grabbing his weapon, pointing it up to the merc's chin, and depressing the trigger to blow his head into pieces. He slammed his foot into the other saber's leg, causing a compound fracture, then grabbed him by the neck and pulled his head straight off along with his spinal column. An explosion got his attention and turned to the right just in time to see several sabers attacking Vega's mech with weapons resembling futuristic M202 flash rocket launchers. The mech was already suffering damage, and even though Vega wasn't actually getting hurt, the Slayer ran forward to assist while grabbing a USAS-12 from the ground. He blew apart the heads of several sabers before the last one aimed his launcher at him and fired. The rocket hit him without doing any damage to his armor, but destroyed the automatic shotgun. He emerged from the smoke and slammed his fist down upon the saber's skull, burying his head into his chest. The surviving sabers quickly piled into two undamaged APCs and attempted to drive away from the hopeless battle, but the Doomslayer picked up the flash and fired 3 rockets into the first vehicle to make sure there were no stragglers. The mech lurched forward and slammed its remaining claw onto the last APC repeatedly until it resembled a crushed can with blood seeping out of it. The Slayer tossed away the launcher and walked towards the damaged mech, crushing the dead bodies of the sabers as he did. Despite its destroyed chassis, loss of an arm, and heavily damaged leg, it was still functioning. The tank division is approaching our position from the bridge. This mech is currently in no condition to assist you, so I will program it to guard the front entrance of the airport, Nodding, the Slayer made his way towards the bridge at the other end of the quadrant while Vega guided the mech over towards the airport. The sounds of treads rumbling against the asphalt reverberated through the air as 25 heavily modified, black-colored Merkava tanks rolled across the service bridge. They took up both lanes in pairs with one tank up at the front and the center as a scout. Because the radios were rendered useless after the EMP blast, a Saber sitting atop the tank would use hand signals to coordinate the division. Looking through his binoculars, he gasped and signaled the other tanks behind him to stop. The tank gunner popped his head out of the hatch. "What is it? What do you see?" "It's him. Tango Primary's coming this way." They scrambled back into the tank as the loader inserted a high explosive round into the rear of the tank turret while the gunner looked through the scope. Soon enough, the one-man army himself casually walked into view. With the tank shell fully loaded, the gunner's finger hovered over the button to fire his payload as he zoomed in on the hostile. "Gotcha!" The gunner grinned as he depressed the button. The shell exploded out of the barrel and shot towards the Slayer, whistling through the air as it did. The gunner was still looking through the scope, eagerly expecting to see the target getting splattered, but nothing happened. The confused Saber looked through the scope again, but magnified the zoom function. To his absolute astonishment and eventual horror, the Slayer caught the shell with one hand. The doomslayer chucked away the shell and broke into a sprint towards the tanks. Predictably, the tank up front fired at him again, but the Slayer easily dodged it and began to close the distance. When the tank fired another round at him, the Slayer punched it away from him and it collided with another tank that destroyed it in a huge explosion. "Back up! Back up! Back the fuck up!" The gunner barked at the driver as the Saber threw the tank in reverse. But it was too late when the Slayer leaped up on top of the tank, brought out the rocket launcher, ripped open the hatch, and fired a rocket directly into the vehicle. The explosion didn't stagger him one bit, and he jumped onto the next tank. He grabbed the barrel and tore off the entire turret and slammed it down on the tank, the force crushing it like it was made of tin and detonating it in another explosion. He flung the turret club at a tank that was aiming at him, and the force of the hit forcibly rotated the tank's turret into another beside it and discharged its payload point-blank into the side. Equipping himself with the Gauss cannon and attaching the siege mode barrel, the Slayer began railing tanks left and right without pause. Every charge shot bored through their reinforced armor and hit the other tanks behind them while the occupants inside were reduced to melted human slag. The Slayer continued his relentless assault upon the tanks, explosions and blue energy arcs reflecting off his visor. He was quickly burning through his remaining plasma ammo, but if Vega assured him that there would be a way to recreate plasma energy, then it was of no consequence if he ran out. He finally burned through the last of his plasma ammo and put away his weapon, charging towards the last Merkava tank. The tank fired its main gun at the Slayer, but instead of dodging, he took the blast head-on and kept right on going. A Saber manning the twin-linked M2 Browning yelled in panic and hosed down the Slayer in a hail of bullets only for the Juggernaut to jump up onto the tank and grab the Saber by the face. He brought out the chainsaw and sawed him in half while crushing his face in his vice-like grip. He dropped a grenade down the open hatch, and it exploded, killing the Sabers inside. He chucked the still-dripping half of the Saber back inside the ruined tank, hopped off of it, and flipped it over with his bare hands. The Slayer grabbed the turret barrel and began to swing it around and around 360 degrees until he let go and the tank was sent sailing through the sky and away from Island. Snapping his head towards the island's central tower, the Doomslayer quickly made his way across the bridge, eager to finish off the Sabers once and for all. Port of Tokyo Warehouse District several minutes earlier. "This is such bullshit," Death Arms shouted to everyone present. "We're heroes, damn it. We gotta do something." Once the fires had been put out, the emergency crews had been recalled back to the barricade to aid anyone affected by the blast from earlier, and Endeavor was brought aside by the JSDF colonel to prevent him from doing anything reckless again. This left the heroes at the port awaiting orders from either the Japanese government or the HPSC. But they had received nothing from them, and any attempts to contact them were met with white noise. And now everyone was in the middle of a heated debate about what to do: wait for orders or take immediate action. The continuous gunfire and explosions coming from Island were a constant reminder that the vigilante was still slaughtering the Steel Sabers. They all finally reached an agreement that something had to be done. Orders be damned. I'm with you, man. Rocklock agreed. I'm not sitting back while that psychopath endangers innocent people. But we can't just blindly charge in there. We need a plan. Manuel quickly interjected, his tone of voice frayed. It's not like all of us can just swim over there. We have rescue boats. Mandalay of the Wild Pussycats announced as she and Pixie Bob stepped forward. They're specialized speedboats used for rescue missions and transporting heroes. We had Tiger and Ragdoll run over to our portside agency to grab 2 of them. They should be here in a few minutes. Don't leave us out in the dust. Hawks admonished as he stood next to Ryukyu, Loud Cloud, Majestic, and Air Jet. We can be the eyes in the sky. Are you sure you guys are okay? Present Mike questioned out of concern as he pointed to Hawks, Ryukyu, and Loud Cloud. No offense, but that guy laid you 3 out pretty badly. It's nothing. We felt worse. Loud Cloud assured him with a wave of his hand before twirling his bow staff in anticipation. So what's our plan of action when we all get there? We rescue the hostages, the other heroes, All Might, and we stop the vigilante. Edshot said with his arms folded. We get in there quick and take him down as quickly as possible. You're underestimating him. Eraserhead called out to Edshot, sounding like he was scolding him. This guy was able to take on 16 pro heroes on his own and incapacitate 5 of us without stopping. He's on a whole new level. It's going to take all of us to beat him. The heroes who weren't a part of the group that engaged the vigilante glanced at each other with uncertainty and fear. After witnessing the vigilante slaughter the Steel Sabers on national television, could they really take on a man capable of dispatching several top-ranked pros and an army of the deadliest mercenaries on the planet? Maruko cracked her knuckles at the mention of how the vigilante had easily beaten her and the others. It was a major chip she wanted to get off of her shoulders and was itching to introduce her foot straight up his armored ass. That guy only beat us because he caught us off guard. He won't be so lucky next time. Maruko boasted with a confident smile. Do we even know if there are any hostages still alive? Snatch the Sand hero gruffly spoke. For all we know, he's probably got them all killed. That is not the issue here. How can you even say something like that? Cementos argued, appalled at Snatch's nihilism. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you, Dash. Snatch shot back before Vlad King stopped him. All right, that's enough. He barked at Snatch before turning to Cementos with a sympathetic expression. We'll rescue as many as we can. That's all we can do. As everyone accepted the grim possibility of their predicament, Beast Genist noticed something in the sky. He couldn't make it out due to the clouds covering the moon, but he could see something flying toward them. Was it another hero, perhaps? He squinted as hard as he could to make out what it was, and his eyes bugged out of his head. Incoming, he shouted as he pointed upwards. Everyone looked up and gasped at the sight of a tank hurtling down from the sky. Everyone dove out of the way as the tank slammed into the ground and tumbled across the port. Something was dislodged from the tank, and it flew right into Midnight, sending her landing on her back. The tank continued to thunder along the port, rolling like a giant metal tumbleweed until it smashed right into a warehouse. The heroes picked themselves back up while Midnight sat herself up and rubbed the back of her head. She felt an unexpected weight on top of her, and her legs and waist felt wet for some reason, non-sexually. Everyone gasped while other less hardened heroes cried out in horror. Midnight looked down at herself and froze. Sprawled across her lap was a severed human torso, one of the Steel Sabers, his guts spilling out all over her legs, and missing a chunk of his face that exposed torn viscera and bone. Midnight let out an uncharacteristic shriek as she shoved the body off of her and quickly stood up, blood staining her ensemble. She looked down at her quivering hands, which were now bathed in crimson. As Eraserhead, Present Mike, and Loud Cloud went over to help their friend, no one realized the tank had crashed into a warehouse that held containers of tanker fuel. All it took was one spark from the vehicle's damaged instruments to ignite the ripped-open containers and detonated the entire warehouse. A massive explosion lit up the entire port, the force of the blast throwing the heroes back and bathing the port in fire for the second time. The heroes were all fighting off concussions sustained from the explosion, but Manuel was the first to immediately spring into action. Put the fires out, he yelled. We have to put the fires out. He used his quirk to attract water from the ocean and hurl it towards the fire in an attempt to douse the flames, while other heroes followed his lead. Beast Genist wrapped up multiple plastic barrels of water nearby with the threads in his costume and poured them onto the flames. MT Lady grew to her full height and grabbed an empty shipping container, using it to scoop up the seawater at the end of the pier like it was a makeshift bucket and dump it onto the fire. Snatch jumped up to one of the cranes and summoned a downpour of sand to smother the conflagration. As Hawks was about to assist the other heroes who ran over to put out the burning warehouse, he stopped when he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. He looked to his left and saw Maruko staring down at the body of the saber. She was as still as a statue and was seemingly transfixed on the corpse. And then, a twisted grin began to spread across her face, giving her a fearsome appearance akin to a predatory monster. Panicking and worried that the currently preoccupied heroes would see her, Hawks quickly hurried over to her and shook her. "Rumi," he quietly exclaimed. He was not going to have her go back down that slippery slope after all these years. This snapped Maruko out of her little episode, and she blinked several times, her eyes locking onto Hawks. They two stared at each other for a few seconds, Maruko expressing guilt while Hawks showed concern. Another series of explosions and gunfire alerted their attention, causing them to look over to Island for the 100th time and reminded of the increasing lunacy of the situation. Island's central tower main server room. The scenes of bloody carnage dominated the video screens. After witnessing the vigilante melt through their entire armored division with a handheld railgun, 9 and his lieutenants were forced to watch him decimate their remaining forces outside of the tower. 9 never felt this angry before in his whole life. How could this have happened? He trained his soldiers to combat heroes, study their quirks, exploit their weaknesses, and show them that they weren't invulnerable. How was this man capable of decimating them this damn quickly? It was maddening. 9 grounded his teeth in infuriation over his failed operation as the screams of his dying men blared from the speakers. He noticed Curator giving him a sideways glance before robotically turning his attention back to the main screen. His eye twitching, 9 interpreted this as a sign of indifference from the villain. Suddenly, the main monitor cut out and was replaced by a blue screen with an odd symbol. A synthesized voice came from the speakers. "If you are listening to this, then the steel sabers are about to be destroyed. You villains who do harm against the innocent are a plague upon society. This will not stand, for he is coming for you. You cannot plead with him, you cannot reason with him, and you cannot bribe him. He is coming to kill you all, .. As the monitors switched back to the vigilante destroying the sabers, the temperature in the room plummeted for those with weak constitutions. Curator was highly interested in the message. Was it the vigilante who sent it to them? David was confused at first, but slowly realized that it had to be the hidden program that was blocking off access to the entire island, and it was possibly sentient. Taking this as an insult and further humiliation, it was at this point that 9 finally had enough. "Mummy, Chimera. We're going after him." Not showing the slightest bit of hesitation or fear, the lieutenants nodded and followed 9 out of the room. Walking down the halls, Chimera couldn't help but wonder about the future of their organization. "Commander, what's next for us?" "The steel sabers have been destroyed." "Not entirely, Lieutenant Chimera. There are mercenaries all over the world. Replenishing our forces will be a simple task. We'll just have to make sure they're all quirk users this time." 9 explained. "We'll come back from this setback and the sabers will rise stronger than ever, right after I have that man's head mounted on my wall." Back in the main server room, Curator silently watched the remaining sabers walk down the hall and disappear from view. He began to formulate a plan in his head and realized that there was a unique opportunity presented here. "Chainsaw, kill the vigilante. Assist 9 and the others if you must," he ordered while sounding disinterested at the last part. With its chainsaws revving up and uttering a throaty snort, the Nomu sauntered out of the room while leaving behind a trail of drool in its wake. "You're sending it after him? Wouldn't 9 be a better distraction?" Volcano pointed out. "Think of this as a means to gauge the vigilante's strength. If he is capable of taking on the steel sabers single-handedly, then we need to know if it's either his quirk or his suit and weaponry that allows him to do so. Seeing him in combat with our Nomu will provide useful intel for all for one. The doctor may even use that info to enhance the combat effectiveness of our..." Curator looked at David and decided to not mention the high-ends. "Future experiments. Chainsaw will buy us extra time while we carry out our mission." And what exactly does that fucking entail? Wolfram grumpily asked, still bitter about his failure and looking like a fool in front of his men. If you're that curious, then I'm willing to indulge you. Curator began, starting with a sarcastic jab. While the vigilante is busy fighting Chainsaw and the Steel Sabers, we will access the Central Tower's vault and retrieve the quirk amplification headset. Once that's done, we will regroup at the roof of the tower with Dusty Ash and Gust Boy. They are preparing a rocket that will cover our escape. Rocket? Swordkill blinked as the others tilted their heads in curiosity. See, we can't let the heroes or even the HPSC know we were here, so All for One gave us a little present to get rid of any witnesses. Volcano answered before Curator could, annoying the villain. As soon as we leave, a timed rocket will be launched into the air and disperse its payload, VX gas. Curator revealed with a malicious glint in his eye. Wolfram's eyes widened, along with his lackeys, while David and Melissa looked at Curator in absolute horror. Though the United Nations had all known samples of it destroyed, our master was fortunate enough to acquire the last known canister of VX gas in the world. The explosion will be enough to disperse its payload, and the gas will spread over the entire island. There will be no survivors. Curator allowed this to sink in with everyone in the room before speaking again. Now that Wolfram's question has been answered, let's move on to brass tacks. Sam, are you able to open the vault? Samuel Abraham got up from the corner he was huddled in and walked towards Curator while straightening his tie. I could, but due to the Rouge program, it already has the vault sealed via reinforced security doors by now. But I can still access the safe the headset's contained in. I have the key that can unlock it. Good. Curator nodded before turning to Volcano. I trust you're able to melt through the doors. Volcano smiled behind his mask and conjured a globule of molten magma in his hand. All for One didn't hire me for my good looks. David began to shake his head at his best friend. No. Sam, why are you working for them? Don't you know who they are? He got up and began hurrying towards him in desperation. You can't let them have the headset. Whatever they've done to you, I can help. David was instantly punched in the face by Sam, giving him a bloody nose before being kicked in the stomach by his friend and sent sprawling to the floor in front of Melissa. Spare me your self-righteous pity, you sanctimonious piece of shit. Sam angrily shouted at David as Melissa ran over to him. All those years of creating support items, and you gave all of the royalties to worthless charity groups instead. That money was supposed to be ours, and your bleeding heart robbed me all of it. It was supposed to be mine. Sam, David gasped. He and Melissa were completely unaware that his longtime friend held this much vehemence against him. I am done putting up with your soup kitchen bono horseshit, and I'm through playing second fiddle. Sam finished, his face reddening in anger. The League promised me so much more than you ever did. Provided you get us the headset, Samuel. Curator reminded him before looking down at David. Your friend has been highly beneficial to our organization. We approached him years ago with a rather tempting offer, and he accepted without hesitation. In return for handing over copies of classified blueprints for up-and-coming support items, we would generously compensate him for his services. Sam's been invaluable to the LOV for years, David. Our Nomus wouldn't have been able to reach their full potential without those blueprints. Curator leaned in closer to him, relishing the look of growing fear David had on his face. And when Sam got word that you planned a heist to retrieve the headset, he was more than willing to inform us of everything. And here we are. Heist? Melissa blinked in confusion as she looked at her father. You were after the headset too? What does he mean, Dad? David had a guilty look on his face and sweat poured down from his head. He was absolutely racked with shame over the danger he put his daughter through. Oh, your father didn't tell you. Curator raised an eyebrow in amusement. David here was so desperate to alleviate All Might's condition that he was planning to hire villains to override the security system and retrieve the quirk amplification headset as a way to help All Might. He was perfectly willing to endanger hundreds of innocent lives for his idol. Tears were starting to well up in Melissa's eyes as she stared at her father with a look of heartbroken betrayal. David couldn't formulate a single sentence to his daughter as the sheer weight of everything happening around him further crashed down upon his shoulders. Curator, in an act of sheer cruelty, decided to rub more salt into the wound. Of course, you previously thought that you hired actors pretending to be villains when in actuality, it It was us and the Steel Sabers thanks to our informant. Sam did most of the work for us, but the headset is only our secondary objective. My master's true objective is to show All Might that even his closest friends can fall into the abyss. First, it was Sam, and now you, David Shield. You clearly didn't care for anyone that could have been killed today, and you even got your own daughter in mortal peril. All of this for All Might's sake. How does it feel to know that you were willing to sacrifice everything and everyone for him? Curator tormented the already emotionally crumbling man. No, I didn't want this. David claimed in desperation. He turned to Melissa and reached out to her. Melissa, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, I dash. But his daughter pulled away from him with tears rolling down her cheeks. Melissa hugged herself and turned the other way. She couldn't bear to look at him. Falling to his knees, David Shield was now completely emotionally broken. He looked down at his shaking hands and buried his face into them while weeping. The gravity of his hubris had finally crushed his spirit and reduced him to a sobbing shell of a man. Curator was silent, knowing that there was nothing else left to be said to David. With the first part of his mission fulfilled, all that was left now was to retrieve the quirk amplification headset for his master. He nodded to Volcano, and he walked out the door to the tower's vault with Sam in tow. Curator looked back at the main screen and watched the vigilante continue his slaughter. The villain found himself oddly mesmerized by the sheer ferocity this man unleashed upon the mercenaries. It was like watching a ballet of carnage unfold before his eyes, gory poetry in motion. But who was he? What underlying motive did he have for coming here? As he and the others continued to watch the monitor, they never noticed the security camera watching them. Island's central tower exterior. Sonic Mayhem Rage. And relaying everything to the Doomslayer, courtesy of Vega. The Slayer processed and thought over this new information as he butchered the last remaining Sabers on the island who tried to kill him in a last-ditch futile attempt. For starters, Nine and his lieutenants coming after him saved him the time of hunting them down, and he could eliminate the Sabers organization. The LOV had earned their place on the Slayer's kill list since they were planning to unleash a deadly nerve agent on the island. On the subject of Curator and this all for one, the Slayer knew these guys were calculating, manipulative, and dangerous, just like Hayden. But whereas the chairman of the UAC was a well-intentioned extremist, these two were straight-up villains who were planning to kill innocent people. The League of Villains had to be dealt with at some point after he and Vega were done on Island. Moving on, there was the subject of David Shield. He had a friendship with the symbol of peace, but what was all of that talk about All Might's condition? Was he ill or something? Whatever reason, it served as a catalyst for how the Steel Sabers and the LOV took over Island. However, it was Sam who altered the plan and had real villains infiltrate the island, so killing him would be about as easy as breathing. But the Slayer wasn't going to kill David. The man would live with the consequences of his lack of foresight. There was no need to kill him in front of his daughter. But the last piece of info confused him. The LOV kept talking about a Nomu, which Vega translated as brainless in Japanese, and they were apparently working on making more of them. But what are they? Chainsaw was identified as being one of them, but were they a group of powerful villains or some kind of experiment involving quirks? All of these questions reminded the Slayer of how little he knew about this new universe. Even after Vega supplied him with the info this world's knowledge had to offer beforehand, he was still felt lost. Was it because of the existence of superheroes that was throwing him off? Was it because he was back on an Earth that had some level of normalcy? Was it because he was surrounded by semi-regular people instead of outer space Knights Templar? The Slayer shook his head a little after he vertically tore a saber down the middle. He could sort through all of that at another date. Now was the time to put an end to the Sabers. He stood atop a ruined barricade the Mercs had set up and drew his rocket launcher with the remote detonation mod, firing rocket after rocket at the last remaining Sabers. Explosions rippled outside the towers as bodies, shrapnel, and limbs flew into the air. By now the last remnants of the organization devolved into full-on panic, opting to run away while some foolish few try to fight back. We don't have the firepower for this. Get reinforcements in here. Fuck. But there was no help coming for them because the Doomslayer killed them all. Now it was just an unlucky few who were on the receiving end of his wrath. Dozens were being blown apart or dismembered by the shrapnel from the rocket launcher as the Slayers slowly walked amongst the flames and smoke. He fired his rockets into the most densely packed groups of mercenaries and let the remote detonation do the rest of the work, ignoring the screams of pain from those who were cut into ribbons. For several minutes, this continued with more sabers being bombarded with high-explosive, shrapnel-tipped rockets. Some of them detonated near ammo depots the sabers had set up, creating more thunderous explosions and causing boxes of ammunition to go off, sending bullets of all kinds scattering everywhere like they were firecrackers and hitting multiple sabers. The doomslayer walked amongst the carnage while nearing the front entrance and decided to swap out his rocket launcher for his chain gun. The thundering impacts of the superheated rounds annihilated the remaining mercs, while tearing apart the fortification at the entrance and detonating another ammo stockpile. He put away his chain gun and walked through the ruined frame that led into the tower's main lobby. The Slayer stepped over the pieces of what used to be the mercenaries all over the ground. The main lobby was a large, circular room with red wallpaper and decorative columns dotted around with the floor made from the most pristine marble. Of course, it wasn't pristine anymore due to the rubble, blood, and body parts. Behind the receptionist's desk in the center of the room was a large stone statue depicting the Greek deity Atlas, holding the globe atop his shoulders. The Slayer immediately understood the symbolism behind it. This island was the cornerstone of the world's technology and supported heroes from all across the world by supplying them with support items along with other beneficial inventions for different countries. Not so much now, was it? The damage done to this place would be enough to bankrupt half the entire planet. Not his problem, though. He heard a pain groan, and he looked to his left to see a saber trying to crawl away, his legs gruesomely maimed from the explosions. His HUD showed him the final remaining sabers left on Island 5. So this one on the ground was the last soldier. The Doomslayer slowly plodded towards the downed mercenary, drawing his super shotgun. The wounded saber desperately struggled to crawl away as he trailed blood from his legs. The Slayer continued to follow after him in a menacing, slasher movie-style motion as he reloaded his weapon. The downed saber let out a scream of desperation as he rolled himself over and opened fire at the Slayer with his P90 to zero effect. "What the hell are you?" The Slayer pulled the trigger and obliterated the upper half of the last saber soldier on Island. Reloading his super shotgun as it dripped with blood, he felt a sense of satisfaction after spending several hours fighting these idiots. All that was left now were 9 and his lieutenants, and the organization would be no more. A sudden bolt of lighting from above struck him dead on, the force of the blast sending him stumbling back a bit. The Slayer saw the leader of the Steel Sabers himself land on the ground from the floor above them and bolt towards him with lighting forming in his hands. The Slayer fired his sawed-off at 9's chest and was momentarily surprised to see the pellets bounce off of the armor he was wearing underneath his suit. 9 dodged a fist the Slayer threw at him and discharged a blast of electricity point-blank into his face, the bright flash briefly blinding the Slayer. With his other hand, 9 unleashed a powerful gust of wind that blew the Slayer back, but the Hellwalker regained his balance and ran towards 9 with his chainsaw at the ready. A series of orange-colored blades made of hair shot towards him from the left, and the Slayer swung his saw to block the blades. They then unfurled into a series of razor-sharp whips and began to coil around the saw until they tore apart the chain, destroying his chainsaw. The Slayer grabbed the whips, but was forced to let go when a massive blade the size of a truck speared towards him in an attempt to impale him. The Slayer tightly grasped the blade and stopped it until 9 began launching a series of rapid-fire lightning bolts at him. His suit easily tanked the bolts and threw the blade away from him, charging at 9 again only for several bandages to wrap around his arms and legs. He was about to break free when several mummies of various shapes and sizes with red cycloptic eyes and attached to smaller red bandages dogpiled him and began pummeling him all over. With a mighty flex, he threw them all off and would have pulled out his chain gun if his hands and head weren't suddenly engulfed in bandages. He could hear a loud, bestial roar and felt something large collide with him and begin slamming him to the ground repeatedly. He was then thrown into the air, and the bandages slipped off of his head just in time for him to see a flurry of icicles flying right at him. The Slayer managed to batter them away despite the bindings around his hands, but several of them smashed against his armor with enough force to send him hurtling back to the ground, where multiple hair blades struck him square into his chest. A large, furred fist punched him right into the far wall, leaving an indentation. Picking himself up, the Slayer saw his quarry, 9, Mummy, Slice, and Chimera all standing alongside each other. They looked ready to fight. You, 9 began as he unsheathed his wrist blades. Have caused me no end of trouble, Vigilante. The Doomslayer cracked his neck. He aimed to please. To be continued. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, and share.